The desert heat shimmered across the vast expanse of sand and stone, distorting the horizon like a fever dream. Against this merciless backdrop, a lone figure huddled in the shadow of a sandstone outcropping, her swollen belly a stark testament to life in a place that seemed determined to extinguish it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Hannah Miller pressed her cracked lips together, conserving what little moisture remained in her body as she watched the dust trail of Victoria Blackwood's wagon disappear into the wavering distance. Left with nothing but a small water skin and the clothes on her back, Hannah placed a protective hand over her unborn child and whispered, "We're not done yet." The New Mexico Territory of 1878 was no place for the faint of heart. The land itself seemed to resist civilization. Vast stretches of sun-scorched earth, punctuated by jagged mesas and canyons, carved by ancient waters, long since vanished. Rattlesnake Springs had sprung up around a precious water source, a collection of wooden structures and tents that aspired to become something permanent in a landscape that constantly erased human ambition. Hannah Miller had never intended to call this harsh place home. She'd been following her husband Thomas, a cavalry scout with dreams bigger than his pockets and a smile that could charm the venom from a sidewinder. They'd met back east, where Hannah taught at a small schoolhouse, her neat handwriting and practical nature a perfect complement to Thomas's wild stories and restless spirit. Just 18 months, he'd promised with that infectious grin. Enough time to save for our own place. The army pays well out here where others won't go. 18 months had turned to 24, and then the letter came, not from Thomas, but from the commanding officer at Fort Defiance, an Apache ambush. Thomas's horse returned riderless. After 3 days of searching, they'd found his body in a narrow pass. The letter expressed requisite condolences and informed her that her husband's personal effects would be delivered when convenient. What the letter hadn't mentioned was that convenient meant whenever Victoria Blackwood decided to share them. Thomas's aunt had taken him in as a boy when his parents died of influenza, and she'd never approved of Hannah, the plain-speaking schoolteacher who'd bewitched her nephew away from the family shipping business. Victoria arrived at Hannah's, docker not with Thomas's belongings, but with a Bible and a ledger. "The house belongs to me," she announced without preamble, her tall frame filling the doorway, grey hair pulled tight beneath a black bonnet. "Thomas never completed the payments. It was my money that secured it in the first place." Hannah stared at the older woman, one hand unconsciously moving to her stomach. "I'm carrying his child." Victoria's gaze dropped to Hannah's middle, her expression hardening further. "So you claim. Thomas wrote that you were entertaining visitors while he was away. Men from the fort." The accusation struck like a physical blow. "That's a lie. He never wrote any such thing." "I have his letters, do you?" Victoria stepped inside, uninvited, her boots leaving dust on the floor Hannah had swept that morning. "This settlement talks. The doctor visited twice last month. Because I was ill with fever." Hannah's voice rose despite her efforts to remain calm. "Ask Mrs. Lawson. She brought me willowbark tea every day that week." Victoria's thin lips curved in a smile devoid of warmth. "Mrs. Lawson left on the eastbound stage 3 days ago. Consumption, they say." It was then Hannah realized the careful orchestration of her isolation. The women who had offered tentative friendship had been reassigned with their husbands to other posts or had returned east. The shopkeepers who had extended credit when Thomas's pay was delayed now claimed no knowledge of such arrangements. Within a week, Hannah found herself with no home, no money, and nowhere to turn. Victoria had moved swiftly, presenting documents Hannah had never seen, claiming Thomas had mortgaged everything to his aunt. The local magistrate, more interested in Victoria's family connections than a pregnant widow's protests had sided with the older woman. "You're fortunate I don't have you arrested," Victoria said the day Hannah was forced to leave, a small bundle of possessions clutched to her chest. Theft of family heirlooms would mean prison. "I've taken nothing that wasn't mine or Thomas's," Hannah replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. The gold pendant, the silver pocket watch, both missing from his effects. Hannah's hand went to her throat where the pendant should have been. Thomas's gift on their wedding day. She'd removed it while washing and never found it again. The watch had been on Thomas when he left. Victoria knew this. "You've planted or hidden those things to accuse me," Hannah said, sudden clarity cutting through her grief. "Why? What have I ever done to make you hate me so?" For a moment, Victoria's mask slipped, revealing something like pain beneath the cruelty. "You took him away. He would have stayed and done his duty to the family if not for you." The next morning, Victoria arrived with a wagon and a Mexican driver who kept his eyes downcast. "I've arranged passage for you," she announced, "east to your family." Hannah had no family left, another fact Victoria well knew. But with the entire settlement turned against her and her child's future at stake, she climbed onto the wagon without argument. It wasn't until they'd traveled several hours into the desert, far from any established trail, that Hannah realized the true nature of Victoria's charity. The wagon stopped beside a lonely rock formation. The driver, still avoiding her eyes, unloaded a small pack containing a water skin, some hardtack, and a thin blanket. "This isn't the way east," Hannah said as Victoria descended from the wagon. "No," the older woman agreed. "This is Painted Canyon. The Beale Road is 2 days' walk north. If you're the virtuous woman you claim to be, God will provide. If not..." She gestured to the merciless landscape. "The desert cleanses all sin." Hannah watched in stunned silence as Victoria climbed back onto the wagon. Only as the horses turned did she find her voice. "Why not just kill me outright?" Victoria's face remained impassive. "I'm giving you a chance, more than you gave Thomas, when you filled his head with nonsense about new beginnings out here." As the wagon disappeared, Hannah surveyed her surroundings. The towering red walls of the canyon, the sparse vegetation, the sun beating down without mercy. 2 days to the Beale Road, Victoria had said. If she could make it there, perhaps a passing caravan would help her. If she could keep herself and her unborn child alive that long. That first night, sheltered in the meager shadow of the rock. Formation, Hannah wept, not from fear, but from a deep, burning rage. She had lost her husband, her home, her reputation, and now perhaps her life and that of her child. But in that anger, she found resolve. Thomas had told her stories of desert survival. He'd insisted she learn to recognize edible plants. How? To find water by looking for certain birds and insects. How to navigate by stars. "The desert only kills those who fight against it," he'd said. "Work with it, respect it, and it will give you what you need." At dawn, Hannah tore her petticoat into strips to wrap around her head and neck for protection from the sun. She carefully rationed the water, taking only enough to wet her mouth before setting out toward the north, using the rising sun as her guide. The desert was already awakening, lizards darting between rocks, a hawk circling lazily overhead. She kept her eyes down, watching for movement that might indicate a snake. By midday, the heat had become a living entity, pressing against her from all sides. Her lips cracked and the child within her stirred restlessly. She sought shelter beneath an overhanging rock, dozing fitfully until the worst of the heat had passed. Then she continued her slow journey northward. As dusk approached, Hannah spotted a cluster of barrel cacti. Thomas had taught her that these could contain vital moisture. Using a sharp stone, she carefully cut away the top of one and scooped out the watery pulp inside, savoring each precious drop. This small victory renewed her determination. The stars emerged like distant lanterns as darkness fell, more brilliant than she'd ever seen them. Hannah remembered how Thomas had shown her the North Star and how to use it as a guide. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She continued walking by its light, resting only when her legs threatened to buckle beneath her. The second day brought new challenges. Her water skin was nearly empty and the terrain grew more treacherous, loose scree that shifted beneath. Her feet, hidden sinkholes that could twist an ankle. The baby had grown quieter, concerning her more than her own increasing weakness. By evening, Hannah knew she had miscalculated. The Beale Road should have appeared on the horizon, but there was only more desert stretching endlessly before her. Either Victoria had lied about the distance, or Hannah had veered off course. Either way, her situation had become dire. She found a shallow cave as night fell, curling into it for protection from the wind that had begun to blow, carrying stinging sand. Her water was gone, her lips so cracked they bled when she moved them to pray. The baby hadn't moved in hours. Hannah pressed her hands to her belly, trying to project strength she no longer felt. "Just a little longer," she whispered. "Your father wouldn't want us to give up." Morning came with an unexpected gift, clouds gathering on the horizon, heavy and grey with promise. Hannah struggled to her feet, ignoring the dizziness that threatened to topple her. If it rained, she might catch water in her blanket. It might be enough to continue. She climbed atop a flat rock, watching as the clouds drew closer, her heart lifting with each passing moment. When the first drops fell, she spread her blanket and opened her mouth to the sky, laughing despite her pain. The rain came harder, a sudden desert downpour that slicked her hair to her head and soaked her clothing. Hannah gathered as much water as she could, drinking deeply and refilling her water skin. The baby stirred again, stronger now, as if sharing in her renewed hope, but her celebration was short-lived. With the rain came danger, a flash flood tearing through the canyon below, roaring like a living beast as it carried away everything in its path. Hannah retreated higher, watching in horror as her intended route disappeared beneath a churning torrent of muddy water. Even if the flood receded quickly, the path would be impassable mud for days. She was trapped. As the rain subsided, leaving behind a transformed landscape of glistening rocks and sudden pools, Hannah felt a different kind of dampness. Looking down, she saw water wasn't the only thing released by the storm. Her labor had begun, months too early. "No!" she gasped, clutching her belly. "Not here, not now." But her child had its own plans. Hannah crawled back to the shelter of the cave, her mind racing through limited options. She had no clean cloths, no knife, no help of any kind. The pains were still far apart, but unmistakable. She needed to prepare as best she could. Using the last of her strength, Hannah gathered what material she could find: soft leaves from desert plants, her remaining clean garments torn into strips. She positioned herself on her blanket, her back against the cave wall, and waited for the next contraction, counting the seconds between them. As the sun began to set on her third day in the desert, Hannah Miller cried not from pain, but from the terrible knowledge that she and her child would likely die in this desolate place. All of Victoria's schemes would succeed in the end. She closed her eyes, listening to the desert settling after the storm. The drip of water from rock formations, the cautious return of insects and birds. Despite everything, there was a terrible beauty to this place. Perhaps it wasn't such a bad place to die after all. It was then that Hannah heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the desert. The soft, rhythmic thud of hoofbeats, the gentle jingling of tack. She tried to call out, but her voice emerged as barely a whisper. The sounds continued, growing fainter rather than stronger. Whoever was passing was moving away from her. With the last of her strength, Hannah crawled to the cave entrance and out onto the wet sand. A contraction doubled her over, forcing a cry from her throat that echoed against the canyon walls. She collapsed onto the ground, tears mixing with the damp earth beneath her face. "Thomas," she whispered, though she knew he couldn't hear. "I tried." The hoofbeats had stopped. In the gathering twilight, Hannah thought she saw a figure on horseback, silhouetted against the darkening sky. But her vision was swimming, reality blurring at the edges. The figure dismounted and approached cautiously, becoming clearer with each step. It wasn't Thomas. It wasn't anyone from Rattlesnake Springs. The man who stood before her wore buckskin leggings and a blue cavalry scout's shirt, his long black hair braided with a single eagle feather. His face, angular and weathered by sun and wind, showed neither fear nor disgust at finding her there. "Water," Hannah managed to say, one hand still pressed to her belly as another contraction built. Without hesitation, the man knelt beside her, supporting her head as he held a water pouch to her lips. "Drink slowly," he said, his English accented but clear. "Too much at once will make you sick." Hannah sipped the cool water, feeling life flow back into her. "My baby," she gasped as the contraction peaked. "Coming too soon." The man's expression remained calm, though his dark eyes assessed her condition quickly. "I am Swift Eagle," he said. "I scout for the cavalry at Fort Defiance. Can you ride?" Hannah shook her head. "The baby is coming now." Swift Eagle nodded once, decision made. "Then we make camp here." He rose and returned to his horse, retrieving a bundle from behind. His saddle. Within minutes, he had unfurled a small hide tent and laid out a bedroll inside it. With gentle efficiency, he helped Hannah into this shelter, positioning her on the soft hides before building a small fire just outside the entrance. "My people know about bringing life into the world," he told her, his voice steady and reassuring. "Even here in the desert." Another contraction gripped Hannah, stronger than before. Swift Eagle watched her face, counting silently. "The pains come quickly now," he observed. "The child is eager to meet you." Despite her fear and exhaustion, Hannah felt a spark of hope ignite within her. This stranger, this Lakota scout, had appeared like an answer to her desperate prayers. "Why are you here?" she asked between contractions. "This isn't a usual patrol route." Swift Eagle arranged his medical supplies, clean cloths, a knife, sinew thread, and various pouches of herbs. "I follow the rain," he said simply. "The storm changed the land. I must report new water sources, danger areas." He paused, looking at her directly. "But perhaps I was meant to find you instead." As night fully descended, Hannah's labor intensified. Swift Eagle moved with practiced confidence, heating water, preparing a bitter tea for her to drink, speaking low words of encouragement in both English and his native tongue. When Hannah cried out in pain, he didn't flinch or turn away, but remained steady, a calm presence in her storm. "Your husband?" he asked during a brief respite between contractions. "Dead," Hannah managed. "Ambush 6 months ago." Swift Eagle nodded, understanding in his eyes. "And yet, someone brought you here to die. Who would do this thing?" Before Hannah could answer, the strongest contraction yet seized her. Swift Eagle moved to check her progress, his hands sure and clinical. "The child comes now," he announced. "When the pain returns, you must push with all your strength." What followed was a blur of agony and effort. Hannah focused on Swift Eagle's calm instructions, on the steady rhythm of his voice counting her through each push. When her strength faltered, he fed her sips of water and spoke of the child who fought to join them. "The storm brings life," he told her. "Your child is a child of thunder, strong already." With a final, tremendous effort, Hannah felt her baby slide into the world and heard the miraculous sound of a first cry, thin and indignant, but unmistakably alive. Swift Eagle worked quickly, tying off the cord, cleaning the tiny body, wrapping the infant in a soft cloth. "A daughter," he said, placing the bundle in Hannah's trembling arms. "Strong like her mother." Hannah gazed down at her daughter's face, red and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair like Thomas's. Despite everything, the child had survived. They both had. "Thank you," she whispered, looking up at the man who had saved them both. Swift Eagle inclined his head slightly. "The Creator put us on the same path today. I only did what any person should." As Hannah's daughter nursed for the first time, Swift Eagle tended the fire and prepared a broth from supplies in his saddlebag. The night deepened around them, stars piercing the vast darkness overhead. In this unlikely shelter, surrounded by a landscape that had nearly claimed their lives, Hannah felt a fragile peace descend. "What will you call her?" Swift Eagle asked, passing Hannah a cup of the warm broth. Hannah looked down at her daughter, this miracle born of storm and struggle. "Hope," she said softly. "Her name is Hope." Swift Eagle nodded approvingly. "A good name. Among my people we might call her Wakang Gleshka, spotted thunder, born of the storm that brings life." That night, as her daughter slept against her chest and Swift Eagle kept watch outside the tent, Hannah allowed herself to truly rest for the first time since Thomas's death. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. They would need to travel to safety, face whatever future awaited them. But tonight, they had survived the impossible, and somewhere in the vast darkness, Hannah sensed Thomas would have been proud. Dawn broke over the desert with cool clarity, painting the sandstone formations in hues of amber and gold. Hannah stirred from her shallow sleep, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar sounds, the soft crackle of a dying fire, the whisper of wind through desert sage, and the tiny, perfect breaths of the newborn nestled against her chest. Hope's face was peaceful in sleep, her tiny fingers curled into fists no bigger than thimbles. Swift Eagle had already risen, his lean silhouette visible through the tent opening as he surveyed the terrain. The flash flood from the previous night had transformed the landscape, carving new channels through the sand and leaving behind pools of precious water where there had been only parched earth before. "The water will not last long," he said, noticing. Hannah was awake. "The sun drinks quickly here." Hannah shifted carefully, mindful of her tender body and the infant. "How far are we from any settlement?" Swift Eagle crouched at the tent entrance, his expression measured. "Fort Defiance lies 4 days' ride west. Black Mesa trading post perhaps 2 days north. But you cannot travel so soon after birth." Hannah's heart sank. She knew he was right. Her body felt hollowed out, weakened from the ordeal of labor and the days without proper food or shelter. Even sitting upright sent waves of dizziness through her, yet staying in the open desert with a newborn seemed equally impossible. "I have no choice," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "If we stay, we die." Swift Eagle regarded her with quiet assessment. "There is another way, a day's journey east. My sister's daughter, Little Moon, lives with her husband at the edge of our summer hunting grounds. Their lodge would offer shelter until you can safely travel farther." Hope began to stir against Hannah's chest, her tiny face scrunching as she prepared to cry. Hannah adjusted her position to nurse the infant, wincing at the unfamiliar sensation. "Why would they help me?" she asked. "I'm a stranger to them." Swift Eagle busied himself breaking camp, his movements efficient and practiced. "Little Moon's husband is half Lakota, half white trader. Their home stands between two worlds, as they do. They understand what it means to belong nowhere and everywhere." He paused, watching as Hannah tended to her daughter. "Besides, my sister's daughter has lost 3 babies before they drew breath. She knows the value of new life." Hannah considered his words. She had no reason to trust this man or his family, yet he had already saved her life and that of her child when he could have. Simply pass by. What choice did she really have? When can we leave? She asked. We rest today, travel tomorrow at first light. Swift Eagle's tone made it clear this wasn't negotiable. Your body needs time. The child needs time. I will hunt and prepare what we need for the journey. Hannah wanted to protest, but found she lacked the strength. Even this brief conversation had exhausted her. She nodded reluctantly and settled back into the bedding, Hope still nursing contentedly at her breast. Throughout that day, Swift Eagle moved with purpose around their small camp. He reinforced the shelter against the sun's intensifying heat, gathered water from the remaining pools, and disappeared for several hours, returning with 2 desert hares and a collection of prickly pear fruits. He prepared a stew rich with wild onions and herbs that Hannah didn't recognize, encouraging her to eat as much as she could manage. For strength, he explained, and for the milk your daughter needs. As the sun began its descent, painting the canyon walls in deepening shades of red and purple, Hannah found herself studying her unexpected guardian. Swift Eagle moved with the measured confidence of a man thoroughly at home in this harsh landscape. His face, weathered by sun and wind, revealed little emotion, yet his actions spoke of compassion and duty. He was neither young nor old, perhaps in his 4th decade, with hands calloused from work and eyes that missed nothing. You said you scout for the cavalry, Hannah ventured. Did you know my husband, Thomas Miller? Swift Eagle paused in his task of preparing a deer hide carrier for the infant. I knew of him, the one they found in Coyote Pass after the ambush. Hannah felt a familiar wave of grief wash over her. Yes, that was Thomas. Swift Eagle was silent. For a long moment, his hands still working the soft hide. He died with honor, fighting to the end. You were there? Hope had fallen asleep, and Hannah carefully laid her on the bedroll beside her. No, but I helped track those responsible. His voice remained neutral, revealing neither pride nor anger. The army tells many stories of your husband's bravery. Hannah closed her eyes, memories of Thomas flooding back. His laugh, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, his endless enthusiasm for their future. His aunt didn't think so. She said he abandoned his family duty by coming west. Family duty. Swift Eagle looked up, his hands pausing their work. Was he promised to another? No, nothing like that. His family owned ships back east. He was meant to join the business, marry someone suitable. Instead, he fell in love with a school teacher and joined the cavalry. Hannah's voice caught. Victoria never forgave either of us for that. This Victoria, she is the one who left you to. And I? Hannah nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. Swift Eagle returned to his work, his face unreadable. Among my people, such an act would bring great shame. To abandon a pregnant woman carrying your family's blood. He shook his head slightly. It would not be forgotten. She claimed the child wasn't Thomas's, Hannah said softly. She told everyone I had been unfaithful while he was away. Swift Eagle's hands stilled once more. And this was a lie? Yes, Hannah whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks. Thomas was the only man I've ever loved. Swift Eagle nodded once, as if confirming something to himself. Then your daughter carries his spirit. It will show in her eyes as she grows. That night, as the temperature dropped and the desert transformed from furnace to icebox, Hannah woke frequently to tend to Hope, to shift her aching body, to listen to the unfamiliar sounds of night predators calling in the distance. Swift Eagle maintained a small fire and kept watch, his silhouette a reassuring presence against the star-filled sky. By morning, Hannah found herself stronger than expected. The food and rest had begun to restore her, and despite the lingering soreness, she felt determined to begin their journey. Swift Eagle had fashioned a carrying sling for Hope from the deer hide, soft and secure against Hannah's chest. The horse will carry our supplies and you when you tire, he explained as he saddled the paint stallion. We will follow the high ground where possible. The flooding has made the lower paths unsafe. Their progress was slow but steady. Swift Eagle led the way on foot, choosing the easiest path through the rugged terrain. Hannah followed, sometimes walking, sometimes riding when her strength failed her. Hope slept peacefully in her sling, waking only to nurse before drifting off again. The desert revealed itself differently as they traveled, not the uniform wasteland Hannah had imagined, but a complex tapestry of micro-environments. Swift Eagle pointed out signs of life she would have missed. The nearly invisible tunnel of a kangaroo rat beneath a creosote bush, the tracks of a bobcat along a dry stream bed, the distant soaring of a golden eagle riding thermals high above. The desert hides its treasures, he told her. Those who rush past see only death and emptiness. Those who observe with patience find life everywhere. By midday, the sun had become merciless, the air shimmering with heat. Swift Eagle led them to a narrow canyon where the high walls provided blessed shade, and miraculously, a small spring bubbled from the rock face, creating a pool no larger than a wash basin but filled with cool, clear water. We rest until the heat passes, he announced, helping Hannah dismount. As they shared a simple meal of dried meat and the remaining prickly pear fruits, Hannah found herself wondering about the man who had saved her. How did a Lakota come to scout for the cavalry in New Mexico? She asked. I thought your people lived far to the north. Swift Eagle drank deeply from his water skin before answering. My father's people are Lakota. My mother came from the Jicarilla Apache. I was raised in both worlds until the wars came. His expression remained impassive, but something in his voice suggested old wounds. When the fighting ended, I had no place among either people. The army offered a path that used my skills. Your knowledge of both worlds, Hannah observed. Yes. I speak 7 languages. I read sign and track in ways many cannot. I understand how different peoples think. He met her gaze directly. I am useful to them, so they overlook what they do not like about me. Hannah thought about this as she nursed hope in the shadow of the canyon wall. Swift Eagle occupied a space between worlds, belonging fully to neither. Perhaps that explained his willingness to help her. He recognized another outsider. And your family? She asked. You mentioned your sister's daughter. Some remain with the northern bands. Others, like Little Moon, have made new lives at the edges of both worlds. He began repacking their supplies with practiced efficiency. We adapt or we vanish. This is the way it has always been. As the afternoon heat began to wane, they resumed their journey. The terrain grew more challenging. Rocky outcroppings that required careful navigation, steep slopes where loose scree threatened to slide away beneath their feet. Swift Eagle remained attentive, frequently checking Hannah's condition and adjusting their pace accordingly. By evening, Hannah's renewed strength had begun to fade. Each step required more effort than the last, and even Hope's slight weight seemed to increase tenfold against her chest. Swift Eagle noticed her faltering and immediately called a halt. We camp here tonight, he announced, indicating a natural hollow beneath an overhanging rock shelf. Tomorrow, we will reach Little Moon's place before midday. Too exhausted to argue, Hannah sank gratefully onto the ground, cradling hope as Swift Eagle efficiently established their camp. The infant had begun to fuss, her tiny face reddening with displeasure at the day's long journey. She knows something is wrong, Hannah murmured, trying to soothe her daughter. Babies sense these things. Swift Eagle paused in building the fire. Not wrong, different. She's a child of movement, born between places. Like her mother, she adapts. Hannah wasn't so certain. As night descended and the stars emerged in their thousands, she found herself overwhelmed by the immensity of her situation. She had no home, no resources, no plan beyond reaching Little Moon's lodge. What kind of future could she possibly provide for Hope? Swift Eagle seemed to sense her distress. He sat nearby, not intruding, but present, his hands busy preparing. A tea from plants he had gathered during their journey. "When I was a boy," he said quietly, "my grandfather told me that the stars are the campfires of those who have gone before us. They watch over the living, guiding our paths when we lose our way." Hannah looked up at the vast canopy of stars. "Do you believe that?" "I believe there is wisdom in all stories that help us continue when continuing seems impossible." He offered her a cup of the steaming tea. "Drink, it will help your milk and ease your pain." The tea was bitter but not unpleasant, with hints of mint and something earthy beneath. Hannah sipped it slowly, feeling its warmth spread through her tired body. Hope had finally settled, her tiny chest rising and falling in the rhythm of deep sleep. "What happens after we reach Little Moon's place?" Hannah asked, voicing the question that had troubled her all day. "I can't stay there forever. One step, then the next. This is how all journeys are made." Swift Eagle added more wood to the fire. "Little Moon and her husband James trade with settlers and Navajo alike. They have connections. Perhaps they will know of a place where you can start again. And if they don't?" Swift Eagle regarded her steadily across the fire. "Then we find another path. But first, you must heal." That night, Hannah slept more deeply than she had since Thomas's death. Perhaps it was exhaustion, perhaps Swift Eagle's tea, or perhaps simply the knowledge that, for the moment at least, someone else was carrying the burden of planning their survival. When she woke, the eastern sky was just beginning to lighten, revealing Swift Eagle already preparing for their departure. "You should have woken me," Hannah said, carefully shifting Hope from her side to nurse her. "Your body heals in sleep," he replied matter-of-factly. "The stronger you become, the faster we travel." Their second day of travel revealed a gradual change in the landscape. The stark, red canyons gave way to more open terrain, with scattered juniper trees and patches of hardy grasses appearing more frequently. Swift Eagle pointed out distant landmarks, a distinctive peak shaped like a wolf's head, a line of dark green that indicated a seasonal creek, a smudge of smoke that marked human habitation. "Little Moon's place," he said, indicating the thin column of smoke. "By midday, as I promised." As they drew closer, Hannah could make out more details. A small adobe structure nestled against a hillside, several corrals containing horses and goats, a garden plot protected by a brush fence. Two figures moved about the homestead, one tall and broad-shouldered, the other smaller and quick-moving. Swift Eagle whistled, a distinctive pattern that carried across the distance. The smaller figure stopped and turned toward them, then raised an arm in greeting before hurrying toward the larger person. Together, they began walking to meet the travelers. Hannah felt a surge of anxiety. These strangers would determine her immediate future, perhaps even her survival. Would they welcome her or see her as an unwanted burden? "Little Moon has a good heart," Swift Eagle said, as if reading her thoughts. "And James Blackfeather understands the ways of both peoples. They will not turn you away." As the distance closed between them, Hannah could see the approaching figures more clearly. Little Moon was a young woman, perhaps in her early 20s, with a heart-shaped face and eyes that tilted upward at the corners like her uncle's. She wore a simple calico dress with beaded moccasins, her long black hair braided and wrapped with red cloth. Beside her, James Blackfeather stood taller than Swift Eagle, with broad shoulders and a face that indeed showed his mixed heritage. His father's strong Lakota features softened by his mother's Anglo influence. Little Moon reached them first, embracing her uncle briefly before turning curious eyes toward Hannah and the infant. "Uen-Chi told me in a dream that you would bring guests," she said to Swift Eagle, her English accented but clear. "She did not say one would be so small." Swift Eagle made the introductions with formal courtesy, explaining Hannah's situation in terms that maintained her dignity while conveying the urgency of her need. Little Moon's expression grew grave as she listened, her eyes moving from Hannah to Hope and back again. "A woman who would do such a thing to another woman carrying new life," she said when Swift Eagle finished, "has a heart of stone." She stepped forward and gently touched Hope's downy head. "But your daughter is beautiful, strong. You will both stay with us until you are ready to continue your journey." James Blackfeather nodded his agreement. "Our home is simple, but there is space for you and the little one. You'll be safe here." Relief flooded through Hannah, making her knees weak. Swift Eagle steadied her with a hand on her elbow, his expression revealing a rare hint of satisfaction. Little Moon's home was indeed simple but comfortable. A two-room, adobe structure with packed earth floors, swept clean and walls whitewashed to reflect the sunlight that streamed through the small windows. Hand-woven rugs in bright patterns covered the floors, and a black iron stove provided both heat and cooking space. The larger room served as kitchen and living area, while the smaller contained a bed built into the wall, covered with colorful blankets and soft furs. "You will sleep here," Little Moon said, indicating the bed. "James and I will use the summer shelter until you are stronger." Hannah started to protest, but Little Moon raised a hand to silence her. "It is our way to care for those in need. One day, you will do the same for another." That evening, after a meal of bean stew, cornbread, and fresh goat's milk, Hannah sat outside with Little Moon, while James and Swift Eagle discussed cavalry matters some distance away. Hope slept contentedly in a cradle James had quickly fashioned from woven willow branches, her tiny face peaceful in the fading light. "My uncle says the white woman who abandoned you claimed your child was not your husband's," Little Moon said. Without preamble, her hands busy with some beadwork, Hannah tensed. "Yes, it was a lie." Little Moon nodded, continuing her work. "Such accusations are powerful weapons. They turn a community against you, make them question everything about you." She glanced up. "The same happens among my people when someone wants to harm another." "She wanted me gone," Hannah said softly. "I represented everything she disliked. Thomas's choice to leave the family business, his love for the West, his refusal to follow the path she had planned for him. And now she believes you are dead," Little Moon observed. "What will you do?" Hannah looked down at her sleeping daughter. "I don't know. I have no money, no home, no family left. I was a teacher once, but who would hire me now with a newborn? And no references." Little Moon's nimble fingers continued working the colorful beads into a pattern. "Perhaps the question is not what you will do, but where you will go. Some places hold too many ghosts to build a new life." Hannah considered this. Rattlesnake Springs had never truly been home. It had always been a temporary stop on the way to somewhere else, somewhere she and Thomas would make their own. Perhaps Little Moon was right. Perhaps she needed to look beyond what had been lost to what might still be possible. "I could go east," she said slowly. "Back to Pennsylvania, where I taught before." Little Moon shook her head. "Too many would ask questions you do not wish to answer. A woman alone with a new child always draws attention." She tied off a knot in her work and bit the thread. "There are other places. New places where people begin again and the past matters less than what you can offer." "Such as?" "Silver Creek, 3 days' journey north. It's a new settlement. Miners, traders, families looking for fresh start. James delivers supplies there twice each month. They have no school yet, but many children in need of learning." Hope stirred in her cradle, making small mewling sounds that would soon become full-fledged cries. Hannah lifted her daughter, cradling her close, as she considered Little Moon's suggestion. A new settlement would indeed ask fewer questions. If she presented herself as a widow with teaching experience, perhaps she could establish herself before Victoria's poisonous whispers could reach that far. "Would they accept me? A woman alone with an infant?" Little Moon smiled slightly. "Silver Creek is not like eastern towns. people there have their own secrets, their own reasons for starting over. They judge based on what you bring, not what you left behind. She reached over to touch Hope's tiny fist. Besides, children are precious in such places. They represent future, hope, continuity. Over the next 7 days, Hannah recovered her strength under Little Moon's attentive care. The young woman proved knowledgeable about childbirth recovery, preparing teas and poultices that eased Hannah's discomfort and hastened her healing. She showed Hannah how to use a cradleboard for Hope, allowing her to carry the infant securely while keeping her hands free for work. James Blackfeather, initially reserved, gradually warmed to their guests. He spent evenings carving a set of small wooden animals for Hope and discussing the conditions in Silver Creek with Hannah. His descriptions painted a picture of a rough-edged but growing community with opportunities for someone with Hannah's skills. They've built a meeting hall that could serve as a school, he explained one evening. Several families have offered to provide room and board for a teacher. The mining company would pay a small salary. Swift Eagle remained for 3 days before departing to complete his scouting mission, promising to return within a fortnight. Before leaving, he took Hannah aside, his expression unusually intent. "Little Moon tells me you consider Silver Creek," he said. "It is a good place to begin again, but you should know, Thomas Miller's name is known there. The cavalry post nearby was his last assignment before the ambush." Hannah felt her heart constrict. "Will that cause problems for me?" "Perhaps not, but you must decide. Will you claim his name or create a new story?" His dark eyes held hers steadily. Either path has consequences. It was a question Hannah had been avoiding. To claim Thomas's name meant risking that Victoria's rumors might eventually reach Silver Creek. To deny it felt like a betrayal of his memory and Hope's birthright. There were no easy answers. "I need more time to decide," she said finally. Swift Eagle nodded. "Time you have, but not endless. Choose the path you can walk with honor." He touched Hope's head lightly. "For both of you." After his departure, Hannah found herself contemplating her options with increasing urgency. Silver Creek represented her best chance at establishing a new life, but Swift Eagle's warning lingered. How would she present herself? What story would she tell? On her 10th day with Little Moon and James, as Hannah sat in the shade of the porch, mending one of the dresses Little Moon had given her, a dust cloud appeared on the horizon. James noticed it first, shading his eyes against the sun. "Riders," he said, his voice neutral but his posture tensing. 3, maybe 4. Little Moon emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. "Traders?" "Perhaps." James reached for the rifle that hung beside the door. "Or soldiers." Hannah felt cold dread settle in her stomach. She gathered Hope from her cradle and retreated inside, her mind racing. Had Victoria somehow discovered she had survived? Had she sent men to finish what the desert had failed to do? James positioned himself on the porch, rifle held casually but ready. Little Moon continued her chores as if nothing were amiss, though Hannah noticed she had moved a knife within easy reach. The riders approached slowly, their forms becoming clearer as they neared the homestead. 3 men on horseback, wearing the dust-covered clothes of travelers rather than military uniforms. "Ho, the house!" called the lead rider as they drew, within hailing distance. "Is this the Blackfeather place?" "It is," James replied evenly. "State your business." "Name's Marshal Thornton, Territorial Marshal out of Santa Fe." The man removed his hat, revealing graying hair and a weathered face creased by sun and experience. "Looking for information about a missing woman, schoolteacher named Hannah Miller." Hannah's breath caught in her throat. Through the window she watched as James straightened slightly. "What's your interest in her?" he asked, neither confirming nor denying knowledge. Marshal Thornton dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate, as if aware of the rifle in James's hands. Got word from Fort Defiance that a Lakota scout found a white woman abandoned in the desert. Thought she might have come this way. He reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a folded paper. Got a warrant for the arrest of Victoria Blackwood on charges of attempted murder and abandonment. Need the woman's testimony if she survived. Hannah stepped onto the porch, hope cradled in her arms. "I'm Hannah Miller," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "And I'm very much alive." The marshal's eyes widened briefly at the sight of the infant before his professional demeanor reasserted itself. "Mrs. Miller, glad to find you in one piece." He approached the porch, moving unhurriedly. Lieutenant Foster at Fort Defiance received quite a tale from his Lakota scout. Said he found you half dead in Painted Canyon, about to deliver a child. "Swift Eagle saved our lives," Hannah confirmed. "How did you know to look for me here?" Scout told his commanding officer the whole story when he returned to the fort. "Lieutenant Foster recognized your husband's name. Captain Thomas Miller was well respected in these parts." Marshal Thornton's expression softened slightly. "Foster sent word to Santa Fe immediately. Seems your mother-in-law's story about you abandoning your husband's memory didn't sit right with the men who served with him." Hope began to fuss, and Hannah automatically shifted her to a more comfortable position. "What happens now?" she asked. "That depends on you, ma'am." Marshal Thornton gestured toward the porch steps. "Mind if I sit? Been a long ride, and this might take some explaining." Little Moon brought coffee as Hannah and the marshal talked. The two other riders, deputies it turned out, remained with the horses, giving them privacy for the difficult conversation. "Victoria Blackwood is currently being held in territorial custody," Marshal Thornton explained, cradling the mug in his weathered hands. "She claims you left voluntarily, that the whole thing was a misunderstanding." Hannah gave a bitter laugh. "A misunderstanding? She left me in the desert to die, Marshal. She took everything, my home, my reputation, my husband's possessions. Then she dumped me miles from nowhere, with barely enough water to last a day. We found witnesses who saw her return alone after supposedly taking you to the eastbound stage," the Marshal said. "And the Mexican driver who accompanied her has agreed to testify in exchange for immunity. But without your formal statement, the case is weaker." Hannah looked down at Hope, peacefully sleeping against her chest. "You want me to return to Rattlesnake Springs?" "Eventually, yes. For the trial, but not immediately." He sipped his coffee. "The territorial judge won't be through that area for at least 2 months. In the meantime, there's the matter of your husband's estate." Hannah frowned. "What estate?" "Victoria claimed Thomas left nothing, that the house was hers, that he'd mortgaged everything. That's what she wanted everyone to believe." Marshal Thornton set down his mug. "Truth is, Captain Miller had a substantial bank account in Santa. Fee, military pay, plus shares in a silver mine near Silver Creek that's just started producing. He also owned a plot of land outright, 50 acres just outside Silver Creek settlement, all deeded to you in his will, which was filed with the territorial office." Hannah stared at the marshal, trying to process this information. "That's impossible. Thomas never mentioned any mine shares or land. Meant it as a surprise, I expect. Lieutenant Foster said Miller talked about building a proper home for his family once his service was up. Had plans drawn up and everything." The marshal's expression was sympathetic. "Victoria Blackwood knew about the will. That's likely why she was so determined to be rid of you before you discovered the truth." Little Moon, who had been listening silently, spoke up. "So Hannah is a wealthy woman now?" "Not wealthy exactly, but comfortable. Enough to start fresh, especially with the teaching skills the lieutenant says you have." Marshal Thornton regarded Hannah thoughtfully. "Captain Miller was setting up a future for you both. Seems only right you should claim it." Hannah felt overwhelmed. In the space of minutes, her prospects had transformed from uncertain dependency to unexpected security. Thomas had planned for their future after all, had been working toward the dreams they'd shared in quiet moments. "What about Victoria?" she asked. "If I testify against her, she'll likely serve time. Attempted murder of a pregnant woman isn't something the territorial court takes lightly." The marshal's voice was matter of fact. "But that's for a jury to decide. Your job is just to tell the truth." Hannah thought of Victoria with her cold eyes and bitter heart. Even knowing what the woman had done, Hannah found no satisfaction in the thought of her imprisonment. Yet the truth needed to be told, for justice, for Hope's future, for Thomas's memory. "I'll testify," she said finally, "but not until Hope is stronger and I've seen this land Thomas purchased. If I'm to build a life there, I need to know what I'm working with." Marshal Thornton nodded. "Fair enough, I'll send word to the judge. Meanwhile, I can escort you to Silver Creek whenever you're ready to travel." He glanced at the infant. "The town doctor there delivered my own children. Good man. He'll want to check on the little one." That night, after the marshal and his deputies had departed for Silver Creek, promising to return in a week's time, Hannah sat alone on the porch. The vast desert spread before her, the same terrain that had nearly claimed her life, now bathed in the silvery light of a full moon. It seemed to Hannah that she was viewing it through new eyes, not as an adversary to be feared, but as the backdrop for the next chapter of her life. Little Moon joined her, draping a blanket around Hannah's shoulders against the evening chill. "So, Silver Creek after all," she said softly. "Yes, though not as I expected." Hannah adjusted the blanket gratefully. "Thomas left us a future there. I just didn't know." Little Moon was quiet for a moment, her face thoughtful in the moonlight. "Some would say the ancestors guided Swift Eagle to you that day, that they knew you had a path not yet completed." Hannah considered this. She had never been one for mystical thinking, preferring the practicality of her Protestant upbringing. Yet she couldn't deny the extraordinary sequence of events that had led to this moment. Her survival against all, Odd Swift Eagle's timely appearance, Hope's safe birth, and now the revelation of Thomas's provisions for their future. "I don't know if it was ancestors or angels or just blind luck," she said finally, "but I'm grateful whatever the cause." Little Moon smiled. "Names matter less than results. You lived. Your daughter lives. Now you go forward." She reached over to squeeze Hannah's hand briefly, "And you know you will always have friends here, whatever path you choose." Hannah returned the pressure, emotion tightening her throat. "Thank you for everything." Above them, the stars scattered across the night sky like diamonds on black velvet, the campfires of those who had gone before, as Swift Eagle had said. Hannah wondered if Thomas was among them, watching over her and their daughter. The thought brought unexpected comfort. Hope stirred against her chest, making the small sounds that preceded waking. Soon, she would need to be fed and changed, the endless cycle of infant care that structured Hannah's days and nights. But for now, in this moment of quiet reflection, Hannah allowed herself to feel something she had thought lost forever in the desert's cruel embrace. Hope. Not just her daughter's name, but the emotion itself, fragile yet persistent, like the desert flowers that bloomed after rain. Thomas had believed in their future enough to prepare for it, even knowing the dangers of his profession. Now it fell to Hannah to make that future real, not just for herself, but for the daughter who carried his name and blood. As Hope began to cry in earnest, Hannah rose to tend to her, the decision crystallizing in her mind. She would go to Silver Creek. She would build the life Thomas had envisioned for them. And one day, when Hope was old enough to understand, she would tell her daughter the story of how they had survived against impossible odds, finding their way home through the crucible of the desert. The path ahead would not be easy. There was still Victoria's trial to face, a new community to navigate, a home to build. But for the first time since receiving word of Thomas's death, Hannah felt equal to the challenges before her. She had survived the worst the desert could offer. Whatever came next, she would face it with the same resilience that had carried her through the darkness into this unexpected light. The morning Marshal Thornton was scheduled to return dawned clear and cool, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of sage and juniper across the desert landscape. Hannah stood outside Little Moon's home, her belongings, few as they were, packed in a cotton sack James had provided. Hope rested securely in the cradleboard Little Moon had crafted, adorned with protective symbols and soft rabbit fur lining. "You will need this," Little Moon said, approaching with a small beaded pouch. "Medicines for the baby if she becomes feverish on the journey." Hannah accepted the gift, touched by the thoughtfulness. "I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done." Little Moon shook her head. "There is no debt between those who share bread and shelter in times of need." She adjusted the colorful blanket wrapped around Hope. "Remember what I showed you about the cradleboard. Keep it close when you sleep so she feels your warmth." James emerged from the small barn, leading his own horse packed with trading goods. "I'll ride with you to Silver Creek," he announced. "It's time for my regular supply delivery anyway." Hannah had come to appreciate James's practical nature during her stay. Though a man of few words, his actions consistently demonstrated consideration and respect. His decision to accompany them brought Hannah unexpected relief. The journey ahead still felt daunting despite Marshal Thornton's escort. "Swift Eagle wishes he could join us," Little Moon added, "but his duties at the fort keep him there. He asks that you remember what he taught you about reading the desert. Its language may serve you in your new home." A cloud of dust on the horizon announced the marshal's arrival. Hannah squared her shoulders, mentally preparing herself for the journey and the changes it would bring. The past 2 weeks at Little Moon's homestead had been a period of healing and recovery, but also of decision-making. Hannah had determined that in Silver Creek, she would acknowledge Thomas as Hope's father and her late husband, but would speak of her time in Rattlesnake Springs only when necessary. The truth would come out during Victoria's trial, but until then Hannah preferred to establish herself based on her own merits rather than as an object of pity or curiosity. Marshal Thornton arrived with a small wagon in addition to the horses he and his deputy rode, a thoughtful accommodation for a woman traveling with an infant. "Thought this might be more comfortable for you and the little one," he explained, helping Hannah secure her meager possessions in the back. "Road to Silver Creek isn't exactly smooth, but this has good springs," Hannah thanked him, carefully settling herself and Hope in the wagon seat. Little Moon approached for a final farewell, pressing her forehead briefly against Hannah's a gesture of kinship that brought unexpected tears to Hannah's eyes. "May the road rise to meet you," Little Moon said softly, "and may the wind be always at your back." "That sounds more Irish than Lakota," Hannah observed with a small smile. Little Moon's eyes crinkled at the corners. "James's mother was half Irish. Some wisdom crosses all boundaries." She touched Hope's cheek one last time. "Remember, you are both children of the storm now, strong enough to flourish where others would falter." With final farewells exchanged, the small convoy set out, Marshal Thornton leading, Hannah in the wagon, James and the deputy bringing up the rear. The journey to Silver Creek would take 2 days, following an established trail that wound through the high desert terrain. The landscape gradually changed as they traveled, the stark red canyons giving way to rolling hills dotted with pinyon pines and juniper trees. Wildlife appeared more frequently, rabbits darting across the trail, a coyote watching from a distant ridge, hawks circling overhead. Hannah found herself viewing these sights with new appreciation, recalling Swift Eagle's teachings about the desert's hidden life. Hope proved to be a remarkably good traveler, soothed by the wagon's gentle rocking and the cradleboard's secure embrace. She woke only to nurse and rarely cried, her dark eyes taking in the changing scenery with what Hannah fancied was the same curiosity that had characterized her father. "She has Thomas's eyes," Hannah commented to Marshal Thornton during a brief rest stop. "The same way of looking at everything like it's a puzzle to solve." The marshal nodded, refilling their water containers from a small spring. "I met your husband once, when he first came to the territory. Struck me as a man who noticed things others missed." He handed Hannah a filled canteen. Seems his daughter inherited that quality. As they prepared to resume their journey, Hannah found herself thinking about her destination with increasing curiosity. "What kind of place is Silver Creek? James has told me a little, but I'd like to know more about where we'll be living." Marshal Thornton helped her back into the wagon before answering. "It's a young settlement, not yet 5 years old, started as a mining camp when they discovered silver in the hills, but it's grown beyond that now. Has a proper main street with a general store, hotel, couple of saloons, about 30 permanent families plus the miners and traders who come and go." He adjusted his hat against the sun. "It's rough around the edges still, but settling down. The mine owner, Mr. Hollister, has been pushing for civilization, brought in a doctor, established a town council, donated land for a church building." "And there's truly no school yet?" Hannah asked. "None formal. Mrs. Parker, the minister's wife, teaches reading to whoever shows up on Sundays after services, but she's expecting a child herself and looking to pass that duty to someone qualified." He glanced at her appraisingly. "Word of your background as a school teacher caused quite a stir when it got around. Education carries weight in a place looking to become more than just a mining camp." This news both encouraged and intimidated Hannah. She would be welcomed for her skills, which was reassuring, but expectations would be high. After months of having her competence questioned in Rattlesnake Springs, the prospect of being valued for her abilities was both exhilarating and daunting. They made camp that evening in a protected hollow where a seasonal stream had left behind a pool of clear water. James efficiently erected a small canvas shelter for Hannah and Hope, while the marshal and his deputy saw to the horses and fire. The familiar routine of caring for Hope, nursing, changing, settling her to sleep, provided Hannah with a sense of normalcy amidst the unfamiliarity of their journey. As they sat around the fire after the evening meal, James uncharacteristically broke his usual reserve. "You should know that Silver Creek has its own divisions," he said, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "The town proper looks to Mr. Hollister and Reverend Parker for leadership, but the outlying homesteaders keep more to themselves. Then there are the miners, mostly single men living in company housing, and the traders who move between all groups." "Where would I fit in this arrangement?" Hannah asked. James considered before answering. "Your land lies between town and the scattered homesteads, close enough for children to reach a school, far enough to have independence. The land has a small cabin on it," Marshal Thornton added. "Basic but sound. Your husband had work started on a larger house before his last deployment, but it's just a foundation and some framing so far." Hannah tried to imagine it. A piece of land that Thomas had chosen had begun to shape into a home for them. The thought brought both comfort and a renewed sense of loss. This was the future he had envisioned, but would never see. "There's a widow, Mrs. Simmons, who lives on the adjacent property," the marshal continued. "She's offered to have you stay with her until you decide whether to complete the new house or expand the cabin. Has 2 young children herself, so she understands your situation." "That's very kind of her," Hannah said, touched by this unknown woman's generosity. "Folks in Silver Creek look after their own," the marshal replied simply. "And as the widow of Captain Miller, you'll find many doors open to you. He was well respected there." That night, lying in the small tent with Hope sleeping beside her, Hannah found her mind too full for sleep. Tomorrow, they would reach Silver Creek, the place Thomas had chosen for their future, the place where she would now build a life alone with their daughter. Despite the marshal's reassurances about her, welcome there, anxiety curled in her stomach. What if she couldn't meet their expectations? What if Victoria's poison somehow reached them before she could establish herself? Hope stirred in her sleep, one tiny hand escaping the swaddling to curl in the air. Hannah gently tucked it back, marveling at the perfection of those miniature fingers. Whatever came, she would face it for her daughter's sake. They had survived the desert, birth in the wilderness, the journey thus far. Silver Creek was simply the next challenge to overcome. Morning brought increased anticipation as Marshal Thornton announced they would reach their destination by midday. Hannah found herself paying closer attention to the landscape, trying to see it through Thomas's eyes, wondering what had drawn him to this particular part of the territory. The terrain had become more varied, mesas rising in the distance, stands of ponderosa pine offering welcome shade, meadows where wildflowers created patches of vibrant color against the earth tones of the desert. "There," James said shortly after they had resumed travel following a brief lunch stop. He pointed toward what at first appeared to be merely another fold in the landscape. Silver Creek Valley. As they crested the rise, the settlement came. Into view below them, a collection of wooden buildings clustered along a main street, with more scattered structures radiating outward. A silver-gray ribbon of water curved through the valley, bordered by cottonwood trees whose leaves shimmered in the sunlight. Beyond the town proper, Hannah could make out the entrance to the mine, the steeple of a small church, and the patchwork of cultivated fields where settlers had coaxed crops from the arid soil. "It's beautiful," she breathed, surprised by the truth of her own words. After the harshness of Rattlesnake Springs, with its dusty streets and utilitarian buildings, Silver Creek appeared almost idyllic, nestled in its protective valley with mountains rising beyond. "Wait till you see your land," Marshal Thornton said with satisfaction. "Captain Miller chose the prettiest spot in the whole valley, in my estimation." Their arrival in town caused immediate interest. As the wagon rolled down the main street, people emerged from shops and homes to watch their progress. Hannah felt uncomfortable under their scrutiny until she realized their expressions held curiosity rather than judgment. A woman about her own age even smiled and waved from the doorway of the general store. Marshal Thornton drew the wagon to a halt in front of a two-story building with Silver Creek Hotel and Dining, painted in neat letters across its facade. "We'll stop here first," he explained. "Mrs. Parker asked to meet you as soon as you arrived. She's likely waiting inside." Hannah straightened her borrowed dress and adjusted Hope's blanket, suddenly conscious of her appearance after days of travel. The marshal seemed to sense her discomfort. "Don't fret about looks," he said kindly. "Folks here understand you've been through an ordeal. They're just glad you both survived." The hotel's interior was surprisingly refined for a frontier establishment. Polished wooden floors, curtained windows, even a small piano in one corner of the dining room. A plump, cheerful woman in her 30s rose from a table as they entered, her face alight with welcome. "You must be Mrs. Miller," she said, approaching with outstretched hands. "I'm Sarah Parker, the minister's wife. We're so very glad you've arrived safely." Hannah found her anxiety easing in the face of such genuine warmth. "Thank you. Please call me Hannah." Sarah's attention immediately went to the bundle in Hannah's arms. "And this must be the miracle baby we've heard about. Born in the desert. Oh, during a thunderstorm, they say." "This is Hope," Hannah confirmed, adjusting the blanket so Sarah could see the infant's face. "And yes, she arrived under rather dramatic circumstances." Sarah's expression softened as she looked at the sleeping child. "She's beautiful, and what a story she'll have to tell when she's older." She looked up at Hannah. "We have a meal prepared for you, and then, if you're not too tired, several people are eager to meet you. Dr. Williams wants to check on you both, and Mr. Hollister has some papers regarding your husband's property. The next few hours passed in a blur of introductions and conversations. Dr. Williams, a kindly older man with spectacles and a gentle manner, pronounced both Hannah and Hope to be in remarkably good health, given their ordeal. That Lakota scout knew what he was about, he commented after examining them. The herbal tea he gave you likely prevented childbed fever, which could have been fatal in those conditions. Mr. Hollister, the mine owner, proved to be a brisk, businesslike man in his 50s with an unexpected streak of sentimentality. Your husband spoke often of you, he told Hannah, as he presented the property deeds and documents detailing Thomas's mine shares. Carried your portrait everywhere, showed it to anyone who'd look. This detail, previously unknown to Hannah, brought a lump to her throat. He never mentioned the land or the mine shares in his letters. Wanted it to be a surprise, Mr. Hollister explained. Said he'd promised you a proper home, and by heaven he meant to deliver one. By late afternoon, exhaustion had begun to overtake Hannah's ability to process new information and faces. Sarah Parker, noticing her fatigue, intervened with gentle authority. That's quite enough for one day, she announced to the assembled townspeople. Mrs. Miller and her daughter need rest. There will be plenty of time for further discussions. Tomorrow. Mrs. Simmons, Rebecca, as she insisted Hannah call her, arrived shortly thereafter to escort Hannah to her nearby home. A practical-looking woman in her early 30s, with auburn hair and capable hands, Rebecca had been widowed 2 years earlier when her husband's horse had thrown him during a flash flood. Left with 2 young children and a half-developed homestead, she had managed not only to survive, but to create a thriving small farm. It's not charity, she said firmly when Hannah tried to express gratitude for the offer of accommodation. Having another adult in the house, especially one who can help with lessons for my Jacob and Emma, is payment enough. Besides, she added, with a wry smile, we widows need to stick together in this country. Rebecca's home proved to be a comfortable 2-room cabin with a lean-to addition that served as a summer kitchen. Her children, Jacob, age 8, and Emma, 6, watched wide-eyed as Hannah settled Hope in a cradle Rebecca had prepared. She's so tiny, Emma whispered, peering at the sleeping infant. Was I ever that small? Smaller, Rebecca answered, smoothing her daughter's hair, and twice as noisy. After a simple but satisfying supper, Rebecca showed Hannah to the curtained-off corner of the main room that would be her temporary sleeping area. Tomorrow, if you're feeling up to it, we can ride out to see your land, she offered. It's only about 20 minutes from here by wagon. Hannah accepted gratefully, eager to see the place Thomas had chosen for them. Despite her exhaustion, sleep proved elusive that night. The events of the day had left her mind racing with new information, new faces, new possibilities. The good people of Silver Creek had welcomed her warmly, but she remained acutely conscious of her status as an outsider, a newcomer whose story was known before she even arrived. Dawn found Hannah already awake, nursing Hope while watching the first light creep across the eastern sky through Rebecca's small window. The landscape looked different here, more generous somehow, less hostile than the terrain around Rattlesnake Springs. Perhaps it was simply the presence of more vegetation, or perhaps it was her own changed perspective. After breakfast, Rebecca hitched her wagon, settled her children in the back with firm instructions to behave, and helped Hannah secure Hope's cradle board for the journey to Thomas's, now Hannah's, property. It's good land, Rebecca commented as they traveled the rutted trail that wound through the valley. Has its own spring that runs year-round, unlike some parcels that dry up in summer. Enough flat ground for crops, enough elevation to avoid flooding when the snow melts. Hannah listened, trying to absorb the practical details while managing the emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. This was the future Thomas had planned, the life they were supposed to build together. Now she would have to shape it alone, making decisions he should have been part of. The trail curved around a stand of ponderosa pines and then opened onto a vista that made Hannah catch her breath. A small meadow sloped gently downward towards Silver Creek itself, which meandered through the property in a series of lazy curves. Cottonwoods lined the banks, their leaves shimmering in the morning light. On a slight rise overlooking both meadow and creek stood a small cabin, weathered but solid, with a stone chimney and a covered porch. Beyond it, Hannah could see the beginnings of what would have been their permanent home. A foundation of fitted stone, wooden framing for walls that would never be completed as Thomas had envisioned them. "He started building it himself during leave," Rebecca said quietly, noting the direction of Hannah's gaze. "Worked from dawn to dusk for 2 weeks straight, said he wanted you to have something grand when you arrived." Tears filled Hannah's eyes, but she blinked them away quickly. This was not a moment for grief, but for connection, connecting with the dream Thomas had begun, connecting with the land that would be their daughter's heritage. As Rebecca guided the wagon toward the cabin, Hannah noticed details she had missed at first glance. An attempt at a garden now overgrown with weeds, a small corral behind the cabin, a well with a hand pump that had been a luxury in this territory. Thomas had thought of everything, preparing a place where they could be self-sufficient and comfortable. "Would you like to go inside?" Rebecca asked gently as she brought the wagon to a halt. "Or is this enough for today?" Hannah gathered her courage. "I want to see it all." The cabin's interior was simple but well constructed. One main room with a stone fireplace, a small bedroom separated by a blanket hung from a beam, shelves built into the walls for storage. Dust covered every surface, and mouse droppings testified to the months of abandonment, but Hannah could see the care that had gone into its creation. Thomas's commanding officer had some of the men bring his personal effects here when they learned. Rebecca hesitated. When they received word of his passing, they're in that trunk in the corner. Hannah approached the wooden trunk almost reverently. This would contain the remnants of Thomas's life, the tangible proof of his existence beyond her memories, and the child they had created together. She knelt beside it, running her hand over the smooth wood before lifting the lid. Inside lay Thomas's life, neatly organized as he had always kept his possessions. His spare uniform folded with military precision, books he had treasured, the pocket watch his father had given him that Victoria had falsely claimed was stolen, letters Hannah had written him tied with a faded blue ribbon, and, most precious of all, a small leather journal she had never seen before. "We'll leave you alone for a bit," Rebecca said, ushering her curious children back outside. "Take your time." In the quiet of the cabin, Hannah lifted the journal from the trunk, her hands trembling slightly. Opening it revealed Thomas's distinctive handwriting, neat and precise like the man himself. The first entry was dated shortly after his arrival in the territory. "Saw the land today," he had written. 50 acres with water rights, just as Hollister described. Can already imagine Hannah's face when she sees it. The way her eyes will light up at the meadow, the way she'll immediately start planning where to plant herbs and flowers. Paid the first installment from my signing bonus, worth every penny, to give her the home she deserves. Tears blurred Hannah's vision as she turned the pages, reading Thomas's hopes and plans for their future. His descriptions of working on the cabin during leave, his excitement when he learned of her pregnancy. Through her letters, the final entry had been written just 3 days before the ambush that took his life. Foundation is complete for the main house. Hollister's men will continue the framing while I'm away. With luck, it might be ready by the time Hannah arrives. With our child. I've never built anything that will last before. My life has been about movement, about the next horizon. But now I build for permanence, for a family, For love that continues even when I'm gone. Hannah closed the journal, holding it against her heart as emotions crashed through her. Grief for all that might have been, gratitude for what Thomas had created, and a new, fierce determination to honor his vision by building a life here for their daughter. When she emerged from the cabin, hope cradled in one arm and the journal clutched in her other hand, Rebecca took one look at her face and simply nodded in understanding. "It's a lot to take in," she said, helping Hannah back into the wagon. "But there's no rush to decide anything. The land has waited this long. It will wait until you're ready." Hannah looked back at the cabin as they pulled away, at the half-built frame of what would have been a proper house, at the meadow sloping down to the creek where wildflowers nodded. In the breeze. This was her land now, her responsibility, her opportunity. "I won't need much time," she said quietly. "This is where hope should grow up, where she can know her father through the things he built, the dreams he had for us." Over the next several days, Hannah divided her time between meetings in town and visits to her property. Sarah Parker arranged for her to meet the families with school-aged children, allowing Hannah to assess the educational needs of the community. Mr. Hollister discussed the financial aspects of her inheritance, the mine shares that provided a modest but steady income, the funds Thomas had set aside in the territorial bank. Dr. Williams checked on Hope frequently, marveling at the infant's resilience. "Born weeks early in the desert, yet thriving as if she'd had the best hospital care," he commented during one visit. "That's rare, Mrs. Miller. Take it as a sign of her strength." Hannah did, but she also recognized that Hope's survival owed much to the knowledge and care of Swift Eagle and Little Moon. She made a point of mentioning this whenever someone remarked on her daughter's robust health, determined that the Lakota who had saved them both would be acknowledged for their crucial role. A week after her arrival in Silver Creek, Hannah received two unexpected visitors at Rebecca's home. Swift Eagle himself, accompanied by Lieutenant Foster from Fort Defiance. The lieutenant, a serious young man with reddish hair and freckles that made him look younger than his probable age, had brought official documents requiring her signature regarding Victoria's upcoming trial. "The territorial prosecutor needs your sworn statement," he explained, spreading the papers on Rebecca's table, "about the circumstances that led to your abandonment in the desert." Hannah read through the documents carefully, reliving the painful sequence of events that had led to her near death. The formal legal language somehow stripped the experience of its emotional weight, reducing it to a series of criminal actions: fraudulent misrepresentation of property ownership, slander, kidnapping, attempted murder. "Will I need to appear in person at the trial?" she asked, signing where indicated. "Eventually, yes, but not for several weeks." Lieutenant Foster collected the signed papers. "The circuit judge won't reach Rattlesnake Springs until late August at the earliest." Swift Eagle, who had remained silent during the legal discussion, stepped forward once the lieutenant had stored the documents in his saddlebag. "I brought these," he said, presenting Hannah with a small bundle wrapped in soft deerskin. "Little Moon sent them for the child." And Hannah unwrapped the gift to find several small garments made from finely tanned leather and cloth, all beautifully decorated with beadwork and quillwork. "Birth clothes," Swift Eagle explained. "In our way, a child's first garments carry prayers for their future. Little Moon worked many nights to complete them." Hannah ran her fingers over the intricate designs, touched by the thought and effort behind such a gift. "Please thank her for me. They're beautiful." Swift Eagle nodded. "She also asks if you have decided about the child's second name." Hannah looked at him questioningly. "Wakang Gleshka," he reminded her. "Spotted Thunder," the name Little Moon, suggested for one born of the storm. Hannah had nearly forgotten this conversation from the night of Hope's birth. Among the many decisions and adjustments of the past weeks, the question of her daughter's full name had been set aside. "Would it be appropriate," she asked, "for a child who is not Lakota by blood?" Swift Eagle considered her question seriously. Names are given for many reasons, some for family, some for events, some for hopes about who a child will become. He glanced at Hope, sleeping peacefully in her cradle. This child was born between worlds, saved by both. Her story already connects different peoples. Hannah thought about Thomas, who had embraced the West and its peoples with an open heart, who had worked alongside men of many backgrounds during his time with the cavalry. Would he have objected to his daughter carrying a Lakota name alongside the one Hannah had chosen? "Hope Wakang Gleshka Miller," she said aloud, testing the sound of it. "Is that correct?" Swift Eagle nodded, a rare smile briefly transforming his usually stoic expression. "It is a good name, strong like her mother." After the lieutenant and Swift Eagle departed, promising to return when the trial date was set, Hannah found herself contemplating her daughter with fresh eyes. Hope would grow up in this place Thomas had chosen, educated in the school Hannah would establish, connected to the land in ways Hannah herself was only beginning to understand. But she would also carry within her the memory of her desert birth, the knowledge that her survival was owed to the wisdom and compassion of the Lakota who had found her mother crying in the sand, as the story was now told in Silver Creek. That evening, sitting on Rebecca's porch with Hope sleeping against her shoulder, Hannah made a decision that had been forming in her mind since their first visit to the property. "I'm going to finish the house Thomas started," she announced when Rebecca joined her with cups of evening tea. "Not exactly as he planned it, something simpler that I can manage, but using the foundation and framing he built." Rebecca nodded approvingly. "Jacob's father was a carpenter. His tools are still in our shed, and Jacob remembers some of what his father taught him. He could help, and I'm sure others in town would too." "I can pay," Hannah said quickly, not wanting to impose. "Of course you can," Rebecca agreed. "But neighbors help neighbors here. It's how we all survive." She sipped her tea thoughtfully. "What about the school? Sarah says Reverend Parker is eager for lessons to begin before winter. I thought I might start teaching at the church while the house is being completed," Hannah explained. "Just basics at first, reading, writing, arithmetic. Once we're settled in our own place, I could expand the curriculum and perhaps use one room of the cabin as a proper classroom." Rebecca smiled. "You've been thinking this through carefully." "I have." Hannah adjusted Hope's position as the baby, stirred slightly. "For so long, I've been reacting to events beyond my control. Thomas's death, Victoria's schemes, being abandoned in the desert. Now, I have choices again. Real choices about our future." The realization was both empowering and intimidating. Every decision she made now would shape not only her own life, but Hope's as well. The responsibility was enormous, but for the first time since receiving word of Thomas's death, Hannah felt equal to it. "You know," Rebecca said after a companionable silence, "some might say you were lucky that Scout found you when he did." Hannah thought about the sequence of events that had led to her survival, Swift Eagle following the storm's path, her labor beginning at precisely that moment, his knowledge of childbirth that had saved both her and Hope. "Not luck," she said softly, "providence, perhaps. Or as Swift Eagle might say, ancestors guiding our paths to cross when they needed to." Rebecca nodded, understanding in her eyes. Different words for the same truth. None of us walks alone, especially out here. As darkness settled over the valley and stars appeared in the vast desert sky, Hannah found herself agreeing with this assessment. She had arrived in Silver Creek, feeling isolated and uncertain, a widow with an infant and an unclear future. But in just a week, connections had formed. to the land Thomas had loved, to people like Rebecca who understood loss and rebuilding, to a community that offered both support and purpose. Hope stirred against her shoulder, making the small sounds that preceded waking and hunger. Soon Hannah would need to go inside to attend to her daughter's needs, to continue the endless cycle of care that structured her days. But for now, she remained on the porch, watching the stars emerge above the dark silhouette of mountains. "We're home," she whispered to her sleeping daughter. "Not the way your father planned it, but home nonetheless." The night wind carried her words away, blending them with the soft rustle of cottonwood leaves along the creek and the distant howl of a coyote calling to its pack. The desert, which had nearly claimed their lives, now cradled them in its vast, complicated embrace, a place of both harshness and beauty, danger and opportunity, isolation and connection. Hannah Miller, once cast out into the desert to die, had instead found a beginning. The journey ahead would not be easy, but she would face it with the strength that had carried her through the crucible of sand and stone, the resilience she hoped to instill in her daughter, and the connection she was building in this remote corner of the territory Thomas had chosen for their future. The stars continued their slow wheel overhead, watching as they had for countless generations, as Hannah finally rose and carried hope indoors to begin the next chapter of their unexpected story. The summer passed in a blur of activity as Hannah established herself in Silver Creek. By late July, work had begun on completing the house Thomas had started, with modifications to Hannah's specifications. She had chosen a simpler design than Thomas's ambitious plans: 2 bedrooms, a comfortable kitchen and living area, and a separate room that would serve as both Hannah's study and a classroom for students who couldn't make the journey to town. During winter months, men from town volunteered their labor on weekends, turning the construction into a community event. Women brought food and watched the children, including Hope, who grew stronger and more alert with each passing day. Hannah worked alongside them whenever possible, learning the basics of construction and insisting on contributing physically to the home that would shelter her daughter. "Most widows would just supervise," commented Jacob Miller, no relation, the town's blacksmith, as Hannah helped nail siding boards to the frame. "I'm not most widows," Hannah replied, wiping sweat from her brow with her sleeve. "Besides, I need to know how to repair things when you're all busy with your own concerns." This practical approach had earned her respect in Silver Creek. Unlike Rattlesnake Springs, where Victoria's influence had isolated her, Hannah found herself welcomed into the community's rhythms and routines. 3 mornings a week, she taught classes in the church building, with 27 students ranging from 5 to 16 years old. The other days were spent preparing lessons, working on her house, and caring for Hope, who had become the unofficial mascot of the construction project. "She'll grow up knowing how to frame a wall before she can write her name," Rebecca teased one afternoon as Hannah nursed Hope in the shade of a cottonwood while the men raised roof beams on the nearly completed structure. "There are worse skills for a girl to have in this territory," Hannah replied with a smile, "though I intend for her to master writing as well." August brought 2 developments that disrupted the peaceful routine Hannah had established. The first was a letter from Lieutenant Foster, delivered by military courier, informing her that Victoria Blackwood's trial had been scheduled for the 2nd week of September in Rattlesnake Springs. Hannah would need to appear as the primary witness, requiring a journey she had been both expecting and dreading. The second was the unexpected arrival of Swift Eagle, riding into town one evening as Hannah was completing her day's teaching. He dismounted stiffly, his right arm bound in a sling, his usually impassive face drawn with what Hannah recognized as pain, carefully controlled. "What happened?" she asked, hurrying to help him secure his horse outside the general store. "Apache. Raiders," he replied tersely. "I was tracking them when they doubled back." Dr. Williams, alerted by the storekeeper, arrived quickly and insisted on examining Swift Eagle's injury in his office. Hannah accompanied them, concern overriding any consideration of propriety. The doctor unwrapped the crude bandage to reveal an ugly wound in Swift Eagle's upper arm, the edges showing signs of infection despite his attempts at treatment. "Arrow?" Dr. Williams asked, reaching for his instruments. Swift Eagle nodded once. "Pulled it through 4 days ago." "Used what?" "Medicines I had." "You're lucky it wasn't poisoned," the doctor commented, cleaning the wound with antiseptic that made even the stoic scout wince. "And luckier still that infection hasn't reached the blood." Hannah remained throughout the procedure, serving as the doctor's assistant and providing Swift Eagle with water and reassurance. When the wound had been properly cleaned and bandaged, Dr. Williams declared that his patient needed several days of rest before continuing his journey back to Fort Defiance. "You can stay with me," Hannah offered without hesitation. "The cabin has space, and I owe you far more than shelter." Swift Eagle started to object, but Dr. Williams overrode him. "She's right about the rest. That arm needs proper care for at least 3 days, maybe more." He fixed Swift Eagle with a stern look. "Unless you'd prefer to lose it entirely." That settled the matter. Hannah sent word to Rebecca, who arrived with her wagon to transport Swift Eagle to Hannah's property. During the short journey, he remained silent, his face betraying discomfort with each jolt of the wagon over the rutted road. "The children and I will stay in town tonight," Rebecca said quietly to Hannah as they helped Swift Eagle into the cabin. "Sarah Parker has offered us rooms at the parsonage. It would raise too many eyebrows otherwise, you understanding." Hannah did understand, though the frontier's rigid propriety seemed absurd given the circumstances. Swift Eagle had delivered her child in the wilderness, had seen her at her most vulnerable, yet convention dictated concern about a recuperating man staying in her home. "Thank you," she said simply. "I'll see you tomorrow." Once Rebecca had departed, Hannah settled Swift Eagle on her own bed, insisting over his objections that she would sleep in the main room. Hope observed the proceedings from her cradle, wide-eyed but unusually quiet, as if sensing the seriousness of the situation. "You should not risk your reputation," Swift Eagle said, his voice weaker than Hannah had ever heard it. "These white settlements have strict ways. My reputation can survive a few days of nursing a wounded man who saved my life," Hannah replied firmly, preparing a tea from the herbal medicines he had brought. "Besides, Silver Creek is different from Rattlesnake Springs. They judge by actions, not rumors." Swift Eagle accepted the tea without further argument, its bitter aroma filling the small cabin. Hannah noticed his eyes drifting to Hope's cradle. "Would you like to see her?" she asked. "She's grown considerably since her birth." At his nod, Hannah lifted Hope from the cradle and brought her to the bedside. The infant had indeed flourished in the months since her precarious entry into the world. Her dark hair had thickened, her cheeks had filled out, and her eyes followed movement with alert interest. "Strong," Swift Eagle commented, observing the way Hope held her head steady. "The storm's child thrives." "Thanks to you," Hannah said softly. "We would not have survived without your help." Swift Eagle made a dismissive gesture with his uninjured arm. "You had already done the hardest part when I found you. You kept yourself alive in the desert, kept the child alive inside you. I merely helped with the final steps." Hannah wanted to protest this characterization, but something in his expression stopped her. Perhaps accepting help was as difficult for him as it had initially been for her. Instead, she simply said, "Well, I'm glad you found us regardless." That night, after settling Hope to sleep, Hannah checked on Swift Eagle frequently, concerned about fever developing. He slept fitfully, occasionally murmuring in his native language, his brow beaded with sweat despite the cool night air flowing. through the open windows. Hannah bathed his face with cool water and made sure he drank whenever he woke enough to swallow. By morning, the fever had broken. Hannah found him sitting up when she entered with fresh water, his gaze clearer though. His face remained drawn with pain. "The doctor's medicine is strong," he commented, accepting the cup she offered. "But your care made the difference." Hannah smiled, pleased by his improved condition. "I'm a quick study, and I had an excellent teacher in the desert." They fell into an unexpectedly comfortable routine over the next 2 days. Swift Eagle rested and regained his strength while Hannah divided her attention between caring for him, tending to Hope, and completing necessary tasks around the property. They spoke little, but the silence between them was companionable rather than awkward. On the evening of the second day, as they shared a simple meal of rabbit stew Hannah had prepared, Swift Eagle finally mentioned the letter she had received. "The lieutenant told me about Victoria Blackwood's trial," he said. "You must return to that place." Hannah nodded, stirring her stew without eating. "In less than 3 weeks. I've been trying not to think about it." "You are afraid." It wasn't a question. "Not of her," Hannah clarified. "She can't hurt me now, but I am afraid of how it will feel to revisit that time, to speak of it publicly." Swift Eagle was silent for a moment, considering her words. "Among my people, when someone experiences great suffering, they sometimes perform a ceremony to tell their story, not just with words, but with movement, with objects that represent what happened. It helps to move the pain outside the body, to transform it." Hannah thought about this concept. Like a testimony in court, but with more dimensions. "Yes, but also different. In your courts, you tell only facts: when, where, how. In our ceremony, you speak of what the experience did to your spirit, how it changed your path." He set down his empty bowl. "Both have power. Both help heal in different ways." The insight resonated with Hannah. She had been dreading the clinical recitation of events the court would require, the reduction of her suffering to dates and actions. Perhaps she could approach it differently, as a necessary step in her healing, a moving of pain outside herself. "Will you come to the trial?" she asked suddenly. "I know it's not your responsibility, but I will be there," he interrupted. "The lieutenant has assigned me to escort you and to testify about finding you in the desert." Relief flooded through Hannah. Having Swift Eagle present would provide not just physical protection, but emotional support as she faced Victoria again. She reached across the table impulsively, squeezing his uninjured hand in gratitude. "Thank you." The brief contact seemed to surprise him, but he didn't pull away immediately. When he finally did, it was with a nod of acknowledgement rather than discomfort. The next morning, Dr. Williams visited to check Swift Eagle's wound, pronouncing it much improved and clearing him to travel after one more day of rest. Rebecca arrived shortly after with supplies from town, including a package of letters and papers Hannah had received. "News from Rattlesnake Springs," Rebecca said, handing Hannah an official-looking envelope. "The marshal asked me to make sure you got this right away." The letter, written in Marshal Thornton's precise hand, contained troubling information. Victoria Blackwood's brother had arrived from back east and had hired an expensive lawyer from Santa Fe. They were attempting to build a defense around Hannah's mental state, claiming she had suffered delusions during pregnancy and had wandered into the desert herself during an episode of hysteria. "They're trying to paint me as insane," Hannah said, her voice tight with anger as she showed the letter to Rebecca. "As if I would choose to give birth alone in the wilderness." Rebecca's expression darkened as she read. "This is despicable, but not surprising. When facts aren't on their side, people like that attack character instead." "The marshal says they've been gathering statements from people in Rattlesnake Springs who will testify that I seemed unstable after receiving news of Thomas's death." Hannah paced the small cabin, frustration building. Of course I was distraught. My husband had died. Swift Eagle, who had been listening from the doorway, spoke quietly. This is why evidence matters more than words. The driver who took you into the desert, will he testify? The marshal has secured his cooperation. Hannah, confirmed. And there's physical evidence, the wagon tracks, the place where I was left. But the trial is still weeks away, and in the meantime, Victoria's brother is spreading these stories. Stories cannot harm you here, Swift Eagle pointed out. You have built truth with these people through your actions. They know who you are. His calm perspective helped settle Hannah's anger, reminding her that Silver Creek was not Rattlesnake Springs. Here, she had established herself based on her merits rather than gossip. Victoria's attempt to undermine her character would find little purchase among people who had worked alongside her, who had watched her teach their children and build her home with her own hands. By the time Swift Eagle departed the following day, Hannah had formulated a plan for approaching the trial. Rather than allowing Victoria's lawyer to control the narrative, she would request permission to tell her full story from the beginning, her marriage to Thomas, his death, Victoria's gradual campaign to isolate and discredit her, and finally, the abandonment in the desert. I won't let them reduce me to a hysterical woman or paint Victoria as a concerned relative, she told Rebecca as they watched Swift Eagle's figure disappear into the distance. The truth is more powerful than their lies. The weeks before the trial passed quickly as Hannah completed preparations for both her journey and her extended absence. The house was now finished enough for habitation, though some interior work remained. She moved her belongings from Rebecca's home, grateful for the independence while knowing she would miss the company and support. Sarah Parker organized the women of Silver Creek to take turns checking on Hannah's property while she was away, and arranged for Rebecca's daughter Emma to care for the chickens and garden. Mr. Hollister offered Hannah the use of his personal carriage for the journey, a comfort she gratefully accepted, knowing the trip would be difficult enough without adding physical hardship. Hope is still so young for such a journey, Hannah fretted to Dr. Williams during a final checkup before their departure. What if she becomes ill on the road? She's stronger than you think, the doctor reassured her. And you'll have Swift Eagle with you. A man who delivered a child in the wilderness should be able to handle any minor ailments that arise. The morning of their departure dawned cool and clear, a hint of autumn crispness in the air despite the lingering summer heat. Hannah dressed in her most formal attire, a navy blue dress Sarah had helped her alter to fit her post-pregnancy figure, with a matching bonnet that shaded her face. She wanted to appear composed and respectable, a direct contrast to the unstable woman Victoria's defenders would describe. Swift Eagle arrived precisely on schedule, accompanied by Lieutenant Foster and a young cavalry private who would drive the carriage. The lieutenant would ride ahead to make arrangements for their overnight accommodations, while Swift Eagle would ride alongside the carriage as both guide and protector. The journey should take 2 days if the weather holds, Lieutenant Foster explained as Hannah's small trunk was secured to the carriage. We'll stop overnight at Fort Wingate, where you'll have proper quarters and meals. Hannah nodded, only half listening as she bid farewell to Rebecca, Sarah, and the other friends who had gathered to see her off. Hope, securely wrapped in the cradleboard Little Moon had sent, observed the proceedings with wide, curious eyes, unaware of the significance of their journey. Remember, you're not alone in this, Rebecca said, embracing Hannah tightly. We're all with you in spirit, and you'll return to a home and community that values you. These words sustained Hannah as the carriage rolled out of Silver Creek, following the territorial road that would eventually lead them back to Rattlesnake Springs, a place that now seemed like something from another life. Swift Eagle rode silently. Beside them, his presence a reassuring constant as the familiar landscape gave way to terrain Hannah had never seen. They traveled steadily through the day, stopping only to rest the horses and tend to Hope's needs. The infant proved to be a remarkably good traveler, sleeping for much of the journey and waking only to nurse or observe the changing scenery with apparent fascination. "She remembers the movement," Swift Eagle commented during one rest stop, watching as Hope's eyes tracked a hawk circling overhead. "Her spirit knows what it is to journey." Hannah smiled, adjusting the blanket around her daughter. "Perhaps. Or perhaps she simply trusts that she is safe with us." By late afternoon, the distant outline of Fort Wingate appeared on the horizon, a collection of adobe and wooden buildings surrounded by a palisade wall. Lieutenant Foster had ridden ahead and met them at the gate, escorting Hannah to the officers' quarters where a small room had been prepared for her and Hope. "Swift Eagle will be housed with the scouts," he explained, leading the way across the parade ground. "I've arranged for you to dine with the commander and his wife this evening, if you feel up to it." Hannah agreed, grateful for the opportunity to refresh herself after the dusty journey. The room, though simple, offered luxury compared to her recent accommodations. A proper bed with clean linens, a washstand with fresh water, and a rocking chair positioned near the window. Hope's cradle board was placed carefully on the bed, the infant still sleeping peacefully despite the change in surroundings. The commander's wife, Mrs. Harrington, proved to be a kind, motherly woman who immediately took an interest in Hope and expressed admiration for Hannah's courage. "The entire fort has heard your story," she confided as they shared tea before dinner. "The men who served with your husband speak very highly of both of you." Dinner was a more formal affair than Hannah had experienced since leaving Pennsylvania, with multiple courses served by the commander's orderly and conversation that carefully avoided the upcoming trial. Instead, they discussed the development of Silver Creek, the prospects for the territory's growth, and the commander's hopes for peaceful relations with the native tribes. "Swift Eagle represents the best possibility for that future," Commander Harrington commented. "A man who can move between worlds, who understands both perspectives. We need more like him." Hannah found herself watching Swift Eagle during this conversation. He sat at the far end of the table, included in the meal but clearly separate, his formal cavalry scout's uniform a stark contrast to his usual buckskins. He contributed little to the discussion, answering questions when directly addressed, but otherwise observing with the same careful attention he gave to desert landscapes. After dinner, as Hannah prepared to retire for the night, Swift Eagle approached her briefly in the corridor outside her room. "We will reach Rattlesnake Springs by tomorrow evening," he said quietly. "You should prepare yourself. It will not be an easy return." Hannah nodded, appreciating his directness. "I've been preparing since the moment I learned of the trial date, but I won't pretend I'm looking forward to it." "Remember why you go," he said. "Not for revenge, but for justice, not just for yourself, but for your daughter's heritage." The simple reframing helped settle Hannah's nerves. This journey wasn't about confronting Victoria for personal satisfaction. It was about establishing the truth so that Hope would grow up knowing her father's legacy had been protected and her mother's character vindicated. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Swift Eagle's expression remained impassive, but Hannah thought she detected a softening around his eyes. "Sleep well. Tomorrow requires strength." The second day of travel brought increasing tension as the landscape gradually became familiar. Hannah recognized landmarks she had passed during her journey west with Thomas years earlier. Distinctive rock formations, a particular bend in the river, the distant silhouette of mountains that had once represented possibility and now carried more complicated associations. As the afternoon waned, the outskirts of Rattlesnake Springs came into view. Still the dusty, hard-scrabble settlement Hannah remembered. though perhaps slightly larger than when she had left. Swift Eagle rode closer to the carriage as they approached, his posture alert, eyes scanning the surroundings with heightened vigilance. "Marshal Thornton will meet us at the hotel," Lieutenant Foster explained, riding alongside. "He's arranged rooms for you there rather than at the boarding house where Victoria's brother is staying." Hannah nodded, grateful for the consideration. The thought of encountering Victoria or her supporters before the trial filled her with dread. She drew Hope closer, the infant now awake and watching the unfamiliar surroundings with wide eyes. Their arrival did not go unnoticed. As the carriage rolled down the main street, people stopped their activities to stare, conversations halting mid-sentence as residents recognized the woman they had been told had abandoned the settlement months earlier. Hannah kept her head high, refusing to show the discomfort that twisted in her stomach. Beside the carriage, Swift Eagle maintained his protective position, his presence drawing almost as many stares as Hannah herself. Marshal Thornton awaited them outside the hotel, his weathered face breaking into a relieved smile as he helped Hannah descend from the carriage. "Glad to see you arrived safely, Mrs. Miller," he said warmly, tipping his hat before nodding to Swift Eagle and the lieutenant. "Rooms are prepared for all of you. I've arranged a private dining room for supper so we can discuss tomorrow's proceedings without an audience." The hotel was modest compared to Eastern establishments, but represented luxury in this frontier settlement. Hannah's room offered a clean bed, fresh water, and, most importantly, a lock on the door. She settled Hope on the bed, relieved to have reached their destination safely but increasingly nervous about the confrontation to come. Supper with Marshal Thornton, Lieutenant Foster, and Swift Eagle was a serious affair, focused on practical matters. The Marshal outlined the trial procedure, explaining that Judge Harmon was known for running an orderly court and had little patience for theatrical tactics. "Victoria's lawyer is a city man named Ellsworth," he explained, "thinks he can intimidate witnesses with legal language and aggressive questioning, but the judge won't allow badgering, particularly of a woman with an infant." "What about Victoria?" Hannah asked, the name still difficult to speak aloud. "Will she testify?" "Her lawyer has indicated she will. Their defense hinges on presenting her as a concerned relative who was trying to help an increasingly unstable widow." Marshal Thornton's expression revealed his opinion of this strategy. But the Mexican driver's testimony contradicts that entirely. He's prepared to state under oath that Victoria specifically instructed him to leave you in a remote area with insufficient supplies. Hannah nodded, absently stroking Hope's back as the infant slept against her shoulder. "And tomorrow? You'll appear before the judge at 10 o'clock. I'll present the territory's case first, then call you as a witness. Just tell the truth, exactly as it happened." He hesitated, then added, "Victoria will be present throughout. Are you prepared for that?" Hannah considered the question carefully. The last time she had seen Victoria Blackwood, the woman had been watching impassively as Hannah was abandoned in the desert to die. What would it feel like to face her again, now with Hope in her arms as living proof of their survival? "I'm prepared," she said finally. "She has no power over me anymore." Later that night, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion, Hannah stood at the window of her hotel room, looking out at the darkened street. Rattlesnake Springs slumbered beneath a canopy of brilliant stars, the same stars that had witnessed her suffering and survival. Somewhere in this town, Victoria Blackwood was perhaps also awake, plotting her defense against charges that could send her to territorial prison. A soft knock at the door startled Hannah from her thoughts. She approached, cautiously, Hope still sleeping in the makeshift cradle she had arranged. "Who is it?" she called softly, unwilling to disturb her daughter. "Swift Eagle," came the quiet reply. Hannah opened the door to find him standing in the dimly lit hallway, still fully dressed despite the late hour. "Is something wrong?" she asked, alarmed by his unexpected appearance. He shook his head. No immediate danger, but there is talk in town. Victoria's brother has been telling stories in the saloon, trying to turn opinion against you before the trial. Hannah sighed, stepping back to allow him to enter. It was improper, of course, but propriety seemed a small concern compared to the situation at hand. "What kind of stories?" she asked, keeping her voice low. "That you seduced your husband away from his family obligations, that you were seen with other men while he was away on patrol." Swift Eagle's expression remained neutral as he relayed these ugly accusations. "The usual weapons men use against women, they cannot otherwise defeat." "None of it is true," Hannah said, anger flaring despite her exhaustion. "I know this," Swift Eagle replied simply, "and so does anyone who matters, but I thought you should be prepared to hear such things tomorrow." Hannah sat heavily on the edge of the bed, the weight of what awaited her suddenly overwhelming. "Will it never end? Even with evidence, with witnesses, they still try to destroy my character rather than admit what she did." Swift Eagle remained standing, his tall figure silhouetted against the dim light from the hallway. "Some people cannot face their own wickedness. They must create stories where they are righteous and others are deserving of punishment." He paused, then added, "But lies cannot stand against truth forever. Your survival, your daughter's existence, these are proofs no story can erase." His words steadied Hannah, reminding her of the strength she had discovered in herself during those desperate days in the desert and the months of rebuilding that followed. Victoria could spread whatever lies she wished. The reality of Hannah and Hope's survival remained an indisputable testament to both Victoria's cruelty and Hannah's resilience. "Thank you for warning me," she said, regaining her composure. "I'll be ready for whatever they try tomorrow." Swift Eagle nodded once. "I will be there. The marshal has arranged for me to sit near you during your testimony." This simple statement offered more comfort than any elaborate reassurance could have. After he departed, Hannah returned to the window, but her perspective had shifted. The town no longer seemed threatening, merely small. Small in both size and spirit compared to the community she had found in Silver Creek. Whatever happened in tomorrow's trial, she would return to a place where she was known by her actions, rather than by gossip, where Hope would grow up surrounded by people who valued education and hard work over social position. With this thought firmly in mind, Hannah finally retired to bed, sleeping soundly until dawn broke over Rattlesnake Springs. The day of confrontation had arrived. The territorial court convened in the town's largest building, normally used for community gatherings and church services. By 9:30, the room was filled to capacity, with townsfolk, soldiers from the nearby fort, and curious travelers all crowding the rough-hewn benches. Hannah entered through a side door, escorted by Marshal Thornton and with Swift Eagle following closely behind. Hope, freshly fed and changed, dozed contentedly in Hannah's arms, unaware of the tension that filled the room. A space had been reserved for Hannah in the front row, directly across from where Victoria Blackwood sat with her brother and lawyer. Hannah refused to look in their direction as she took her seat, focusing instead on settling Hope comfortably on her lap. Swift Eagle positioned himself directly behind her, his presence a silent bulwark against the whispers and stares that followed her entrance. At precisely 10 o'clock, Judge Harmon entered, a tall, austere man with silver hair and penetrating blue eyes that missed nothing as he surveyed the assembled crowd. The bailiff called the court to order, and the proceedings began with the formal reading of charges against Victoria Blackwood: kidnapping, attempted murder, fraud, and perjury. Victoria's lawyer, Mr. Ellsworth, immediately objected to the severity of the charges, arguing that the case represented nothing more than a family disagreement tragically misconstrued. Judge Harmon listened impassively before overruling the objection. "The evidence will determine the appropriate characterization of these events," he stated firmly. "Proceed with your case, Marshal." Marshal Thornton presented the territory's evidence methodically, the deeds proving Thomas's ownership of the property Victoria had claimed, statements from soldiers who had delivered his personal effects after his death, testimony from the Mexican driver who confirmed that Victoria had instructed him to leave Hannah in a remote area with minimal supplies. Throughout this presentation, Hannah kept her gaze fixed forward, avoiding looking directly at Victoria. But when Marshal Thornton finally called her to testify, she knew the moment of confrontation had come. Passing hope to Swift Eagle, who accepted the infant with surprising ease, Hannah moved to the witness chair, took the oath, and finally allowed herself to look at the woman who had tried to destroy her. Victoria Blackwood had aged in the months since their last encounter. Her face, always stern, now showed deep lines of bitterness around her mouth and eyes. She sat ramrod straight, hands folded in her lap, her expression a careful mask of indignation. Beside her, her brother, a portly man with Thomas's eyes, but none of his warmth, watched Hannah with naked hostility. With Marshal Thornton guiding her testimony through careful questions, Hannah related the entire story, from Thomas's death to Victoria's gradual campaign of isolation and accusation, culminating in the day she was abandoned in the desert. She spoke clearly and calmly, presenting facts without embellishment, describing the desert ordeal and Swift Eagle's timely arrival with the same straightforward delivery. When she mentioned Hope's birth, a murmur ran through the courtroom, and Hannah noticed several women dabbing at their eyes. Victoria's expression never changed, but her brother shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "And after your rescue, what did you learn about your husband's property?" Marshal Thornton asked. "That Thomas had purchased land near Silver Creek, where I now live with our daughter," Hannah replied. "That he owned shares in the silver mine there, which provide income for Hope and me. That he had filed a will leaving everything to me, which Victoria was aware of before she claimed his property as her own." The marshal nodded, satisfied. "No further questions, Your Honor." Mr. Ellsworth rose for cross-examination, his expensive suit and polished boots marking him as out of place in the frontier courtroom. "Mrs. Miller, isn't it true that after receiving news of your husband's death, you became emotionally unstable, often crying without provocation and making accusations against neighbors?" Hannah met his gaze steadily. "I grieved my husband, sir, as any wife would. If you call that unstable, then yes. But I made no false accusations against anyone. Several witnesses are prepared to testify that you appeared increasingly paranoid. In the weeks following Captain Miller's death," he continued, consulting his notes, "claiming that items had been stolen, that people were conspiring against you. Items were missing, notably my pendant and Thomas's watch, which Victoria later claimed I had stolen, and people were indeed avoiding me on Victoria's instructions." Hannah's voice remained calm. "That's not paranoia, Mr. Ellsworth. That's an accurate assessment of what was happening." The lawyer shifted tactics, pacing before the witness stand. "Isn't it possible that in your grief and confusion, especially given your pregnant condition, you misinterpreted Mrs. Blackwood's attempts to help you? That you actually requested to be taken to a quiet place to reflect?" A ripple of disbelief ran through the courtroom at this suggestion. Hannah stared at the lawyer incredulously. "Mr. Ellsworth, I did not request to be abandoned in the desert with nothing but a water skin and a blanket while 8 months pregnant. No woman would." Her voice hardened slightly. "Victoria told me we were traveling east to my family. When I realized we had gone in the opposite direction, she instructed the driver to leave my belongings by a rock formation and depart. Those are facts, not interpretations." The cross-examination continued for another hour, with Ellsworth attempting to undermine Hannah's credibility through suggestions of emotional instability, confusion, and misunderstanding. Through it all, Hannah maintained her composure, answering directly and refusing to be provoked into emotional outbursts that might support Victoria's defense. When she finally returned to her seat, accepting hope back from Swift Eagle, Hannah felt drained but satisfied. She had spoken her truth clearly and without the anger that had once consumed her. Swift Eagle's earlier words echoed in her mind. This was about justice, not revenge. Victoria took the stand next, presenting a very different version of events. According to her testimony, Hannah had become increasingly erratic after Thomas's death, refusing help and making wild accusations. The journey into the desert had been Hannah's idea, a spiritual retreat of sorts that Victoria had reluctantly facilitated. She spoke of wanting solitude to commune with my nephew's spirit, Victoria claimed, her voice quavering with practiced emotion. I provided what she asked for, leaving her with supplies I thought sufficient for the day or two she planned to stay before returning to town. Judge Harmon's penetrating gaze never left Victoria's face during this testimony. When Mr. Ellsworth concluded his questioning, the judge himself spoke. "Mrs. Blackwood, am I to understand that you left a heavily pregnant woman alone in the desert, at her request with minimal supplies, without informing anyone else of her whereabouts?" His tone made clear his skepticism. Victoria shifted uncomfortably. "She was very insistent, Your Honor. I feared she might harm herself if denied this opportunity for reflection." "Yet you didn't notify the authorities of these fears, didn't seek medical advice given her condition, didn't arrange for anyone to check on her welfare." Each question landed like a hammer blow. "I thought she would return when she was ready," Victoria replied, her confidence visibly wavering. Marshal Thornton's cross-examination further undermined Victoria's account, highlighting the inconsistencies in her story and contrasting them with the physical evidence and other witness testimonies. By the time she stepped down, Victoria's composed facade had cracked, revealing the bitterness and resentment that had driven her actions. The trial continued into a second day, with additional witnesses including Dr. Williams, who had traveled from Silver Creek to testify about Hannah and Hope's condition upon their arrival there. Swift Eagle provided a factual account of finding Hannah in labor, delivering Hope, and bringing them to safety. His testimony particularly damaging to Victoria's defense, given his reputation for unassailable honesty. By midday of the second day, closing arguments were complete, and Judge Harmon retired to consider his verdict. The courtroom remained packed as people waited, conversations conducted in hushed tones as speculation about the outcome spread through the assembled crowd. Hannah sat quietly, Hope sleeping against her shoulder, Swift Eagle still positioned protectively behind her. Across the room, Victoria conferred urgently with her lawyer and brother, her expression growing more desperate as time passed. When Judge Harmon returned an hour later, the room fell instantly silent. He took his seat, arranged his papers, and surveyed the courtroom before speaking. "Having considered all testimony and evidence presented in this case, I find the defendant, Victoria Blackwood, guilty on all charges." His voice carried clearly through the stunned silence. The defendant's actions represent not merely a family disagreement, as her counsel suggested, but a calculated attempt to eliminate Mrs. Miller and her unborn child in order to secure property and assets that legally belonged to them. Victoria's face drained of color as the judge continued outlining her sentence. 5 years in the territorial prison, with all property fraudulently obtained to be returned to Hannah immediately. Her brother sat frozen beside her while Mr. Ellsworth frantically scribbled notes, presumably planning an appeal. "This court will not tolerate such callous disregard for human life," Judge Harmon concluded, his gaze fixed on Victoria. That Mrs. Miller and her daughter survived is a testament to their extraordinary resilience and the timely intervention of Scout Swift Eagle, not to any consideration on your part, Mrs. Blackwood. As the bailiff moved to take Victoria into custody, she finally looked directly at Hannah, her eyes burning with a hatred that had long since consumed any humanity she might once have possessed. Hannah met her gaze steadily, neither flinching nor gloating, simply acknowledging the moment of justice being served. Victoria's brother rose, loudly protesting the verdict and sentence until Judge Harmon ordered him removed from the courtroom. Mr. Ellsworth immediately approached the bench, requesting time to prepare an appeal. The judge granted him the standard, 30 days, but ordered Victoria remanded to custody in the meantime. The evidence of attempted murder is too compelling to allow the defendant to remain at liberty during the appeal process, he stated firmly. As Victoria was led away, her rigid posture finally crumbling, Hannah felt no satisfaction, only a profound relief that this chapter of her life was closing. Hope stirred against her shoulder, whimpering softly as if sensing the emotional currents in the room. "It's over," Hannah whispered, as much to herself as to her daughter. "We can go home now." Swift Eagle's hand rested briefly on her shoulder, a rare gesture of support from the usually reserved man. "You spoke well, with dignity." The courtroom slowly emptied, but many people paused to speak with Hannah on their way out. Some were former neighbors offering belated apologies for believing Victoria's lies. Others were simply curious, wanting to see the woman and child who had survived against impossible odds. Hannah received them all with composure, neither accepting blame nor assigning it, focused only on completing this necessary task so she could return to Silver Creek. Marshal Thornton approached as the last of the crowd dispersed. "Judge Harmon would like to see you privately before you leave town," he said. "Something about property matters." Hannah followed the marshal to the judge's temporary chambers, a small room adjacent to the courtroom furnished with a desk, several chairs, and shelves of legal volumes. Judge Harmon rose as she entered, gesturing for her to be seated. "Mrs. Miller, I wanted to speak with you about Captain Miller's effects," he began, once formalities had been exchanged. "The court will ensure that everything Victoria Blackwood appropriated is returned to you as quickly as possible. However, there is the matter of some items that appear to be missing." Hannah frowned. "Missing items?" "Yes. According to the inventory from Fort Defiance, your husband possessed a gold pendant and a silver pocket watch among his personal effects. Victoria claimed you had stolen them, but they were not found among her possessions when she was arrested." "The pendant was mine. Thomas's wedding gift to me," Hannah explained. "It disappeared from my dressing table shortly before Victoria forced me from the house. The watch was with Thomas when he left for his final patrol." Judge Harmon nodded, thoughtfully. "I suspected as much. It seems likely that Victoria or her brother disposed of these items, perhaps sold them to finance this legal defense." He sighed, making a note in his ledger. "I will issue an order for restitution in the amount of their estimated value. It's poor compensation for heirlooms, I realize, but it's the best the court can offer." "Thank you," Hannah said, touched by his concern for what might have seemed trivial details amid the more serious charges. But the truly important things, Thomas's land, his letters, his journal, those have already been recovered. The judge's stern face softened slightly. "Your perspective does you credit, Mrs. Miller. Too many in your position would be consumed by bitterness." He hesitated, then added, "If I may speak plainly, your testimony was among the most compelling I've heard in my years on the bench. You presented facts without embellishment, yet conveyed the full gravity of what was done to you. The territory could use more witnesses with such clarity and composure." Hannah thanked him, somewhat embarrassed by the praise, and took her leave. Outside the courthouse, Swift Eagle awaited her, having clearly anticipated that she would need a moment to collect herself after the trial's conclusion. "Lieutenant Foster has arranged for us to depart tomorrow morning," he informed her as they walked toward the hotel. "Unless you wish to remain longer." Hannah shook her head decisively. "No, there's nothing for us here now. Silver Creek is home." That evening, Marshal Thornton hosted a small supper in the hotel's private dining room, a quiet celebration of justice served and Hannah's vindication. Lieutenant Foster attended, along with Dr. Williams and, somewhat to Hannah's surprise, Swift Eagle, who typically avoided such social gatherings. "A toast," the Marshal proposed once the meal was underway, "to Mrs. Hannah Miller and her daughter Hope, two of the strongest individuals it has been my privilege to know." Glasses were raised, including Swift Eagle's, though he drank water rather than the wine the others enjoyed. Hannah accepted the tribute with a smile, but felt compelled to add her own acknowledgement. "And to those whose strength made our survival possible," she said, raising her glass toward Swift Eagle, "without whom we would not be here to celebrate tonight." Swift Eagle inclined his head slightly in acceptance, his expression as reserved as ever, but his eyes conveying understanding of the moment's significance. The conversation flowed easily after that, focusing on plans for the return journey and developments in Silver Creek, rather than dwelling on the trial's details. As the evening concluded, Lieutenant Foster mentioned that he had received word from Fort Defiance that Little Moon and her husband James would be visiting Silver Creek in the coming weeks, bringing trade goods and news from their region. "They specifically asked about you and Hope," he told Hannah. "I believe they plan to stay for the Harvest Festival Mr. Hollister mentioned organizing." This news pleased Hannah immensely. She had missed Little Moon's practical wisdom and quiet friendship, and looked forward to introducing her to the community that had welcomed Hannah so warmly. It would complete a circle of sorts, connecting the people who had saved her life with those who had helped her rebuild it. Later, as Hannah prepared for bed in her hotel room, Hope already sleeping peacefully in her makeshift cradle, she found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. From the depths of despair after Thomas's death, through Victoria's campaign of isolation and the nightmare of abandonment in the desert, to new beginnings in Silver Creek, and now this final confrontation with the past, it formed a coherent narrative of survival and renewal that Hannah could hardly believe she had lived. Yet the evidence surrounded her. Hope's steady breathing in the darkness, the documents confirming her ownership of Thomas's property, the gold coins Judge Harmon had awarded as restitution for the missing heirlooms, and most importantly, the connections she had formed with people like Swift Eagle, Little Moon, Rebecca, and the other residents of Silver Creek who had helped transform tragedy into opportunity. Morning brought clear skies and mild temperatures perfect for beginning the journey home. Hannah dressed Hope in one of the garments Little Moon had sent, a soft deerskin dress decorated with intricate beadwork that sparkled in the early light. It seemed appropriate somehow, acknowledging her daughter's unique heritage as they departed the place that had once rejected them both. The same carriage awaited them, freshly provisioned for the return trip. Hannah settled herself and Hope comfortably, arranging the blankets and supplies for easy access during the journey. Swift Eagle appeared just as they were preparing to depart, leading his horse alongside the carriage. "Lieutenant Foster has been called to Fort Defiance directly," he explained. "He sends his regrets. I will escort you back to Silver Creek." Hannah nodded, unsurprised. Military duties often changed suddenly on the frontier. "We'll manage well enough. Hope has proven herself an excellent traveler." Swift Eagle mounted his horse as the carriage driver clicked to the team, setting them in motion. Hannah did not look back as they left Rattlesnake Springs behind, her gaze fixed firmly on the horizon and the future that awaited them in Silver Creek. The return journey progressed smoothly, following the same route they had taken days earlier, but with a very different emotional atmosphere. Where the outbound trip had been tense with anticipation and dread, the return held a lightness of spirit that made even the dusty, rutted road seem less arduous. They stopped at Fort Wingate overnight as planned, where Commander Harrington and his wife again welcomed Hannah warmly, eager to hear about the trial's outcome. News traveled quickly in the territory, but personal accounts were valued over official reports. Victoria Blackwood's sentence has already become a topic of discussion among the officers' wives, Mrs. Harrington confided as she showed Hannah to her quarters. 5 years seems barely adequate for what she did to you and your child. It's enough, Hannah replied. Justice doesn't require her destruction, only that she face consequences for her actions. Mrs. Harrington studied her with newfound respect. You're a remarkable woman, Mrs. Miller. Most in your position would demand the harshest possible punishment. Hannah smiled slightly. Perhaps, but bitterness is its own prison, one I don't wish to occupy. This philosophy, born of Hannah's experiences and refined through conversations with Swift Eagle and Little Moon, had gradually become central to her approach to life. She had witnessed firsthand how Victoria's bitterness had consumed her, transforming grief over her niece's death and her husband's failures into a poisonous hatred that ultimately destroyed her. Hannah was determined to follow a different path, one that acknowledged pain and injustice without being defined by them. The final day of travel brought increasing excitement as familiar landmarks appeared, signaling their approach to Silver Creek. Hope, who had indeed proved an exemplary traveler, seemed to sense her mother's anticipation, burbling cheerfully in her cradleboard and watching the passing scenery with alert interest. Swift Eagle, who had maintained a watchful but reserved presence throughout the journey, rode closer to the carriage as they crested the final ridge overlooking the valley. "Home," he said simply, indicating the settlement below with a slight nod. Hannah followed his gaze, taking in the sight of Silver Creek nestled in its protective valley, the buildings along the main street, the church steeple catching the afternoon light, and beyond them, the scattered homesteads, including her own property, with its newly completed house visible even at this distance. Yes, she agreed, a sense of profound gratitude washing over her. Home. Their arrival caused immediate stir in the community. Word spread quickly, bringing Rebecca, Sarah Parker, and several other friends to greet them before the carriage had even reached the hotel. Hope was passed from arm to arm, admired and cooed over, while Hannah received embraces and congratulations on the trial's outcome. "We never doubted the truth would prevail," Rebecca declared, linking her arm through Hannah's as they walked toward the general store where Mr. Hollister awaited them. "Though I confess I'd have preferred a longer sentence for that woman." Hannah smiled at the echo of Mrs. Harrington's sentiment. 5 years is sufficient. Besides, Judge Harmon left open the possibility of additional charges if evidence emerges about other crimes. Mr. Hollister welcomed them with uncharacteristic warmth, insisting that Hannah join him and his wife for dinner that evening to discuss developments during her absence. "The school building committee has made progress," he informed her. "We've secured additional funding and selected a site adjacent to the church." This news delighted Hannah, who had been teaching in the church's main room with limited space and resources. A dedicated school building would allow her to expand both enrollment and curriculum, fulfilling the educational vision she and Thomas had once discussed during long evenings planning their future. Swift Eagle declined dinner invitations, citing his need to continue to Fort Defiance with his report. But before departing, he approached Hannah as she prepared to leave for her own property, Rebecca having offered to drive her home. "The trial is finished," he said, "but your journey continues." Hannah nodded, understanding the deeper meaning in his simple statement. "You'll visit when you're next in the area?" Hope should know the man who delivered her into this world. A rare smile briefly crossed Swift Eagle's face as he looked at the infant now sleeping peacefully in Hannah's arms. "She will make her own path between worlds," he observed, "as all children of the storm must do." With that, he mounted his horse and departed, his figure gradually diminishing against the landscape until he disappeared entirely around a bend in the trail. Hannah watched him go with mixed emotions: gratitude for all he had done, respect for his wisdom and integrity, and a curious sense of loss that surprised her with its intensity. "He's an unusual man," Rebecca commented as they loaded Hannah's trunk into her wagon. "Not like any Indian scout I've encountered before." "He defies easy categorization," Hannah agreed, "as do most people worth knowing, I've found." The ride to Hannah's property passed quickly as Rebecca updated her on local events. Emma's progress with her reading, Jacob's increasing skill in carpentry, the birth of twins to the blacksmith's wife, Mr. Hollister's plans for expanding the mine operations. Hannah listened attentively, absorbing these details of community life that had continued in her absence. As they approached her land, Hannah felt a surge of emotion at the sight of the completed house standing proudly on its stone foundation. What had been merely framing when she departed was now a proper home with a covered porch, glass windows that caught the evening light, and a stone chimney from which smoke curled invitingly into the darkening sky. "Someone's there," she said. Surprised, Rebecca smiled mysteriously. "A few of us thought you shouldn't return to a cold, empty house after such a journey. Sarah's been tending the fire today, and Mrs. Wilson prepared a stew that should be simmering nicely by now." Tears pricked at Hannah's eyes, not of sorrow, but of profound gratitude for the community that had embraced her so completely. "I don't know what to say." "Then say nothing," Rebecca advised practically. "Just enjoy coming home to warmth and food. You've earned it." The house's interior exceeded Hannah's expectations. During her absence, the women of Silver Creek had completed numerous finishing touches. Curtains hung at the windows, a colorful quilt draped over the bed in the main bedroom, shelves stocked with basic provisions, and wildflowers arranged in a pottery vase on the kitchen table. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, and the promised stew simmered on the cast-iron stove. Most surprisingly, a cradle stood in the corner of the main room, beautifully crafted from local pine with a delicately carved pattern of stars along its sides. A small card propped against it read simply, "For Hope, from the Silver Creek Carpenters Guild." "Jacob helped with the sanding," Rebecca said proudly, as Hannah ran her fingers over the smooth wood. "The men worked on it evenings while you were away. They wanted Hope to have a proper bed now that you're in your own home." Hannah carefully laid her sleeping daughter in the cradle, arranging the soft blankets around her tiny form. Hope sighed. In her sleep, one small hand escaping the covers to rest against her cheek, a gesture so innocent and trusting that it momentarily overwhelmed Hannah with its simple perfection. This was what Thomas had envisioned when he purchased the land and began building their home. This was what Victoria had tried to prevent by abandoning Hannah in the desert. This was what Swift Eagle had preserved by finding her that stormy evening and delivering Hope safely into the world. A home, a future, a place of belonging. Rebecca stayed long enough to share a bowl of stew and ensure Hannah had everything she needed for the night, then departed with promises to return in the morning with fresh milk and eggs. Left alone with her sleeping daughter, Hannah moved through the house, familiarizing herself with its spaces and features. The kitchen with its practical arrangement of cupboards and work surfaces, the main room with the fireplace and comfortable chairs, the second bedroom that would eventually serve as both Hannah's study and a classroom for students who couldn't travel to town during winter months. Everything reflected thoughtful planning and care, from the placement of windows to catch the best light, to the shelves built to accommodate the books Hannah had salvaged from Thomas's trunk. It was not the grand house he had originally envisioned, but it possessed a warmth and character that suited Hannah's simpler tastes perfectly. As night fully descended, Hannah sat by the fire with Thomas's journal open in her lap, rereading his final entries with new understanding. He had created this foundation not just in the literal sense of the house's stone base, but in all the preparations he had made for their future: the land purchase, the mine shares, the will that ensured Hannah would have resources to support herself and their child. Victoria had tried to erase that foundation, to claim it for herself through lies and ultimately attempted murder. But the truth had prevailed. Justice had been served, and now Hannah sat in the home Thomas had begun, with their daughter sleeping peacefully nearby, the ultimate testament to survival and renewal. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: resuming teaching duties, continuing to establish herself in the community, beginning the long process of raising hope to understand both her father's legacy and the extraordinary circumstances of her birth. But tonight, in the quiet of her own home, with the desert wind singing softly around its eaves, Hannah Miller finally allowed herself to feel truly safe. The journey from desperate widow cast out into the desert to independent woman with a home and purpose had been arduous and unexpected. But as she closed Thomas's journal and prepared for her first night in their completed house, Hannah knew with absolute certainty that each step of that journey, even the most painful ones, had shaped her into the person she needed to be for the path ahead. Outside, the stars wheeled slowly across the vast desert sky, the campfires of ancestors watching over the living, as Swift Eagle had described them. Hannah stepped onto the porch briefly before retiring, gazing up at their brilliance, and feeling a profound connection to this land that had nearly claimed her life, yet had ultimately given her a new one. "Thank you," she whispered to the night, to Thomas's memory, to Swift Eagle and Little Moon, to the community that had welcomed her, and to whatever forces, divine or natural, had guided her survival against impossible odds. Then she returned, inside to her sleeping daughter, closing the door on the trial and tribulations of the past, ready to embrace whatever the future might hold in this place they now called home. The harvest festival arrived with Silver Creek transformed by autumn. Colors. 3 months had passed since the trial, and the settlement bustled with preparation as farmers brought in the last of their crops and townspeople decorated the main square with corn shocks and brightly colored gourds. Hannah watched from the schoolhouse steps as her students practiced their harvest pageant, a simple performance they would present during the festival's opening ceremony. Hope rested in her cradleboard nearby, now almost 8 months old and increasingly alert to the world around her. The infant's dark eyes followed the children's movements with obvious fascination, her tiny hands reaching out as if to join their rehearsal. "She'll be among them before you know it," said Sarah Parker, approaching with a basket of apples for the celebration. "Children grow faster than weeds in spring." Hannah smiled, acknowledging the truth in this observation. Hope had already changed dramatically from the fragile newborn who had entered the world during a desert storm. She now sat unassisted, babbled expressively, and showed a determined personality that reminded Hannah daily of Thomas. "Little Moon and James should arrive today," Hannah remarked, gathering her teaching materials as the children dispersed for lunch. "I'm eager for them to see how Hope has thrived." Sarah nodded, understanding the significance of this visit. The doctor mentioned they're bringing medicines to exchange. Apparently, Little Moon's remedies have gained quite a reputation. The school day concluded early to allow final festival preparations. Hannah walked home with Hope, enjoying the crisp afternoon air and the golden light that bathed the valley. Her property had undergone significant transformation since spring. The garden had produced a bountiful harvest, despite being planted late. The cabin had been repurposed as a workshop and storage space, and the main house stood complete with a new coat of pale yellow paint that glowed warmly in the autumn sunlight. As she approached, Hannah noticed a horse tethered outside. Not Rebecca's familiar mare, but a paint stallion she immediately recognized. Her heart quickened as she hurried the remaining distance. Swift Eagle stood on her porch, hands clasped. Behind his back, watching her approach with his characteristic composure. He wore buckskins rather than his scout's uniform, with a single eagle feather braided into his hair. Off duty then, rather than here on official business. "You honor us with your visit," Hannah said, climbing the steps to greet him. "I didn't expect you until tomorrow with the others from Fort Defiance. I came ahead," he replied simply, "to see that all was well before the gathering." Hannah smiled, recognizing the unspoken sentiment behind his practical explanation. In the month since the trial, Swift Eagle had visited Silver Creek twice, on official business, each time making time to check on Hannah and Hope. These visits were brief but meaningful, establishing a comfortable rhythm of friendship that required few words. "We are very well," she assured him, adjusting Hope's position so he could see her clearly. "As you can observe for yourself." Swift Eagle's usually stoic expression softened as he regarded the infant. "She grows strong," he commented, reaching out one finger which Hope promptly grasped with surprising strength. "The spirit of the storm remains in her." Hannah invited him inside, where he presented a small wooden carving, a falcon in flight, crafted with remarkable detail. "For Hope," he explained. "Among my mother's people, the falcon represents vision and purpose." Hannah accepted the gift with genuine appreciation, recognizing both its craftsmanship and symbolic significance. "Thank you. It will have a place of honor in her room." They shared a simple meal as Hannah updated him on developments since his last visit. The school's expansion, Hope's progress, the community projects that had flourished through summer and into fall. Swift Eagle listened attentively, offering occasional observations that revealed his understanding of Silver Creek's evolution from mining camp to established settlement. As evening approached, bringing with it the cool desert darkness, they moved to the porch. Hope had fallen asleep, safely tucked into her cradle in the bedroom with the door ajar, so Hannah could hear her if she woke. "Little Moon sends word that she has completed a winter blanket for Hope," Swift Eagle mentioned as they watched stars emerge above the distant mountains. "She works Lakota patterns with designs from her husband's Irish traditions." Hannah smiled at this image of cultures, blending in tangible form. "I look forward to seeing it, and to introducing Little Moon to the women of Silver Creek. They've heard so much about her from me." Swift Eagle nodded, gazing out at the darkening landscape. "Your place here is established now," he observed. "The people respect you." "They've welcomed Hope and me completely," Hannah agreed. "I never expected to find such acceptance after what happened in Rattlesnake Springs." "People recognize truth when it stands before them consistently," Swift Eagle replied. "You have built something here, not just with lumber and nails, but with teaching and trust." His insight struck Hannah as profoundly accurate. She had indeed built more than a physical home in Silver Creek. She had constructed a life of meaning and connection, both for herself and for Hope. They sat in comfortable silence as full darkness descended, and the desert night creatures began their chorus. Eventually, Swift Eagle spoke again, his voice quieter than before. "I have been offered a position at Fort Defiance. No longer scout, only but liaison between the army and tribal leaders." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "It would mean less traveling, more time in one place." Hannah considered the significance of this development. "That sounds like an important role. Your understanding of both worlds would be valuable." Yes. Another pause. Silver Creek lies within the territory I would oversee. The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but clear. More time in one place, regular visits to Silver Creek, greater opportunity to be part of Hope's life as she grew. Perhaps even... Hannah felt a sudden nervousness, unsure how to respond to what remained unsaid. Swift Eagle had saved her life, had delivered her child, had supported her through the trial and beyond. Their connection was undeniable, yet complex, built on shared experience and mutual respect rather than conventional courtship. Hope would benefit from your wisdom as she grows, Hannah said finally, choosing her words with deliberate care. As would I. Swift Eagle turned toward her, his expression serious in the dim light from the house windows. I do not wish to dishonor Thomas's memory, he said quietly. He provided for you even after death. His spirit watches over this place. Hannah felt a rush of appreciation for this consideration. Thomas wanted us to have a good life, not to dwell in perpetual mourning, she replied. He would understand that hearts can expand to include new connections without diminishing old ones. Swift Eagle nodded slowly, seeming to accept the wisdom. In her words, then I will accept the position, and we will see what path opens before us. It was neither a declaration nor a promise, merely an acknowledgement of possibility, of a future not predetermined but unfolding according to its own rhythm. Yet Hannah felt a quiet joy settle within her, a sense of rightness that had been building. Gradually over these months of healing and rebuilding, morning brought the bustle of festival preparation. Hannah dressed Hope in the special outfit Little Moon had sent, soft deerskin decorated with beadwork that caught the sunlight. The whole town gathered in the square as wagons arrived from outlying homesteads and neighboring settlements, bringing people together for the celebration of harvest abundance. James and Little Moon arrived mid-morning, their wagon laden with trading goods. Little Moon embraced Hannah warmly, before immediately turning her attention to Hope, examining the thriving infant with evident delight. Wahang Gleshka has your strength and her father's eyes, she declared, lifting Hope with practiced ease. But she carries her own spirit too, something new being formed between worlds. Hannah watched as Little Moon introduced Hope to the traditional blessing songs of her people, the infant's face rapt with attention to the unfamiliar melodies. Around them, the festival unfolded. Children playing games, families sharing food, miners and farmers and shopkeepers momentarily united in celebration of community and survival in this harsh but beautiful land. Swift Eagle stood some distance away, speaking with Lieutenant Foster and Mr. Hollister about the coming winter and prospects for peace with neighboring tribes. Hannah caught his eye briefly across the crowded square, their shared glance an acknowledgement of all that had led to this moment, the desperate desert birth, the struggle for justice, the gradual rebuilding of life from the ashes of loss. As the day progressed into evening, with lanterns illuminating the continuing celebration, Hannah found herself sitting with Little Moon, Rebecca, and Sarah Parker. 4 women from different backgrounds, united by common experience and mutual respect. The children of our generation will know a different world, Little Moon observed, watching Hope sleep peacefully in Rebecca's daughter Emma's careful arms. They will learn to walk between traditions, taking strength from each. Hannah nodded, thinking of Swift Eagle's new position and what it represented, a small step toward bridging divided worlds. Hope would grow up in this evolving frontier, carrying her unique heritage and the extraordinary story of her birth. The desert wind rose gently as stars appeared overhead, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. Hannah lifted her face to it, remembering how that same wind had once nearly stolen her last breath, and later carried the sound of Swift Eagle's approach, the moment when despair had transformed into possibility. She had been cast out into the desert to die, yet had found instead the beginning of a new journey. Not the one she had planned with Thomas, but one equally meaningful, a path created step by step through resilience, connection, and the courage to embrace unexpected possibilities. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities. The school needed expansion, hope was growing rapidly, and Swift Eagle's new role would gradually reveal what might develop between them. But tonight, surrounded by community and under the vast canopy of desert stars, Hannah Miller knew with absolute certainty that she and her daughter had truly found their way home. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.